as to the underlying motivations, what function? What purpose? Why? These appear not to be cared about. Only how is a matter of concern, and even there, such answers as may be presented are irrelevant, or at best non sequiturs. If this is all, there is a great void, a great emptiness.
Author and columnist Ben Shapiro, the editor-at-large of Breitbart.com, will talk about Hollywood's influence on how Americans think, the types of personalities voters want in a U.S. president, and what he says is the left's tendency to intimidate political opponents. Mr. Shapiro is the author of 5 books, including Primetime Propaganda, and his 2013 release, Bullies.
Shapiro, from your newest book, Bullies, you write, President Obama was elected at least in part because he was black. It was a positive for him. Many Americans believed that America needed to elect its first black president to move beyond issues of race once and for all. Instead, they got a champion race bully masquerading as a racial unifier. What do you mean?
What I mean by that is that President Obama came into office on this great wave of American approval, this idea that he was going to unify the country along racial lines. Instead, what's happened is that the president has really suggested in multiple ways not only the continuation of American racism, but that is one of the most serious problems still facing the country. We've seen it in everything, manifest in everything from the George Zimmerman trial to the continued focus on voter ID, the attempt by the Obama administration to paint voter ID as a racist thing as opposed to an attempt to quash voter fraud. The questioning the motivations of the American people, or at least his opponents, is something that President Obama likes to do on a pretty frequent basis, and it pays tremendous dividends. And the only sector of the racial population that showed up in larger numbers than the previous election cycle in 2012 was the black community. They showed up in numbers far outweighing their proportion in the population, which is great. I mean, it's wonderful they showed up. Unfortunately, a lot of folks showed up because they were convinced that by voting for President Obama, they were stopping a great racist tide that had kind of swum up to the surface against President Obama, as opposed to just people who opposed him politically.
So when you hear the term post-racial, what does that mean to you?
Well, post-racial means to me the idea that, you know, we live in a country where everybody is free to make their own way, and that the obstacles that folks face should be identified and targeted on an individual level. I think that we get into ghost hunting pretty quickly when we start talking about institutional racism. And the idea that there is this vast racist conspiracy to keep people down. I don't think that's true in America anymore. It's certainly not true for people of my generation. And the continued push that we saw, for example, at the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, this continued idea that the greatest obstacle facing young black folks is white racism. Not only is it not true, it's tremendously damaging for both white folks and black folks.
In Bullies, you have a subchapter, Anatomy of a Racial Bullying, the Smear Campaign, March 8th, 2012.
Well, I mean, what I was talking about when I talked about the racial bullying there was the racial bullying of the Trayvon Martin case. That case really turned pretty quickly into an attempt by the left to paint George Zimmerman as a white guy who had tracked down and murdered a black kid, as opposed to what actually happened, a half-white guy who was really Hispanic. It's the first time in human history anybody had ever said that someone was a white Hispanic. It's like saying that President Obama is a white black. But George Zimmerman was a Hispanic guy, and he, under disputed circumstances, shot Trayvon Martin after presumably having, and a jury ruled, had his head hit against the ground several times by Trayvon Martin. And that turned into a clear-cut Emmett Till attempt to murder a black person by a white person. And that is not what happened at all. Not only is it not what happened, it's something that the left likes to do on a pretty regular basis, which is to take controversial situations and turn them into a great referendum on the race question in America, whether you're talking about O.J. Simpson or whether you're talking about Rodney King or whether you're talking about something that wasn't even infused with race, like the George Zimmerman case. The FBI has been searching for evidence that George Zimmerman is a racist for months now, and they've been unable to find anything. So George Zimmerman was picked out and he was targeted, and that race was turned into a race case as opposed to what it really was, which was a tragic circumstance for both folks, obviously more tragic for Trayvon Martin because he ended up dead.
You highlight the Associated Press, saying that they wrote a story that seemed racial in nature. Is the media part of this bullying?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the media are the chief bullies in American political life, at least the media that portray themselves as objective. I really don't have as much of a problem with media folks who don't portray themselves as objective. That's what they do, and at least they're honest about it. But there are a lot of folks in the media who say that they're objective and then use that objectivity as a baton to wield against others. So, for example, CNN tried to make it out that George Zimmerman had actually used a racial slur in his 911 call. That was not true. NBC famously edited the 911 call of George Zimmerman to make it sound like he was a racist, saying that George Zimmerman, he had tracked Trayvon Martin down, then said he was black without being prompted by the 911 operator, which was not true. The AP originally reported that George Zimmerman was white when in fact he was Hispanic. All of that was geared toward building up a racial controversy because that sells newspapers, and racial controversy also pushes forward a certain political line. If there is a tremendous amount of institutional racism that still pervades all areas of American life, then historically the way that that's been rooted out is by government interventionism. So if that continues to be the case, if America continues to be a deeply racist country, then what that really is a call for more federal and state and local government intervention into the lives of Americans to try and root out that racism.
Back to bullies. Feminists want to paper over differences between men and women in favor of a bizarre sort of gender androgyny. If there are real differences between the sexes, then women might need men and men might need women, and that would destroy any semblance of pure equality.
Well, equality, according to many women on the left, or many of the feminist left, it means to feminists sameness, as opposed to equality. I believe that women should have the ability to get a job the same as men should. My mom is not only a working woman; she does business affairs on reality TV shows like Hell's Kitchen. She heads up companies. My wife is at UCLA Medical School. I'm a big believer in women in the workplace. What I'm not a believer in is ignoring the reality of the situation, which is that men and women are not only different in terms of genitalia, but are different in terms of how they think. And every study that's ever been done, scientific study, has shown that men and women, their brains do not operate in exactly the same way. That's a beautiful thing. Diversity is a great thing. But attempting to pretend that men and women are identical, especially with regard to how the sexes relate with one another, is a mistake.
Ben Shapiro, who are some of these other bullies that you refer to?
Well, in bullies, I break it down really by topic. I mean, there are race bullies, there are sex bullies, there are environmentalist bullies, there are anti-Israel bullies. There are all sorts of bullies in the American life. And what I really mean by bullies is not just folks who disagree with you politically. What I mean by bullies is folks who say that you are morally inferior if you disagree with them politically. And this is something that the left seems to like to do with a fair bit of frequency. It's not that they disagree with you on the topic. It's that the left, many on the left anyway, think that you're a bad person if you disagree with them. If you disagree with them, it's not because you can have honest differences of opinion. It's not because you can bring evidence to marshal for your argument. It's because you're just a nasty cuss. This is what I said to Piers Morgan on the gun control issue, because this is essentially the argument that he was making. He said, here's why I support, the reason I support gun control is because if you don't support gun control, you don't care about dead kids in Sandy Hook. And so what I said to Piers Morgan, and I meant it, was that it's a nasty thing to stand on the graves of folks and then claim moral superiority. I think that most Americans actually want the same thing. I think that we all want a better life. I think we want a better life for our children, a safer life, a more moral life. I think we all want a spiritually higher life. We all want a lot of the same things. Proclaiming that folks on the other side don't want those things and are actually nasty deep down in the core of them just because they disagree with you is a way to silence the debate. And unfortunately, it seems like one side of the political aisle has really kind of taken a monopoly on that.
And you write, we've spent decades being cowed by the jackboots of the politically correct, the race baiters, class warriors, secularist, and scaremongering thugs. We have bowed to their whims. We've tried to be polite, they've spit in our faces, then blamed us for debasing the level of our national discourse. They've tried to minimize the number of voices in the political arena, and we've gone along with it because we pine for a time when Americans can all share their hopes and dreams together rather than quarreling over what separates us. We want e pluribus unum, from many one. They want the opposite, from one many.
Well, diversity to many folks who are on the left does not mean that we can all share the same goals and aspirations and yet still have different cultures and bring all of those cultures to bear. What it means for many on the left is that if you don't think like me, then you are intolerant and undiverse. And these buzzwords have been used to castigate folks and silence folks and make people feel as though they are morally inferior for taking a certain political position. And that should be unacceptable in the American discourse. And unfortunately, as a response, the only response is to get down in the mud. I mean, politically speaking, this is why, if you had to sum up why Mitt Romney lost the 2012 election, look at how Mitt Romney portrayed Barack Obama and look at how Barack Obama portrayed Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney portrayed Barack Obama as a not competent president. He was not good at his job. He was somebody who didn't know what to do on the economy. He was a neophyte on foreign policy. He really didn't know what he was doing as a general matter, but he was a good family man. He was a good guy. He was somebody who you'd want to go out to a beer with. Romney would actually say this. He'd say, you know, President Obama is a good man. I just think that he's not very good at being president. If you look at how the left campaigned against Mitt Romney, however, including people in the Obama campaign, Mitt Romney was a guy who put dogs on the top of his car. Mitt Romney was a guy who had binders full of women because he hated women. He was somebody who wanted to put you all back in chains. Mitt Romney was the sort of guy who specifically fired employees so that later, 5 years later, their wives would die of cancer because they didn't have health insurance. Mitt Romney was the guy who stashed all of his money in offshore bank accounts while singing a ghostly version of America the Beautiful because he didn't like America. This is who Mitt Romney was, and the polls showed this. Right? In the exit polling, most Americans actually agreed with Mitt Romney on a lot of issues. There's one issue on which they disagreed with Mitt Romney. When it came to the exit polling that said, which candidate do you think cares more about people like you, Mitt Romney got blown away, like 80-20. I think the poll is 81-19. People, including that would include probably certainly a plurality of Republicans, thought that Barack Obama cared more about people like them than Mitt Romney did. That's not because Barack Obama is world's nicest, warmest figure. That's because if you spend years castigating somebody as the world's meanest figure, and you have a choice between incompetent president and second to Mussolini, you're generally going to choose incompetent president.
Ben Shapiro, Bullies is your 5th book. How old were you when you wrote your first book, Brainwashed?
I wrote it junior year of college. I'd have been 19.
How did you come up with the idea of writing that book?
Well, I started off at UCLA. I was 16 when I started UCLA. And I quickly, one of the first days of school, I picked up the UCLA Daily Bruin, which was the paper there. And the paper had an editorial comparing Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel, to Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi. And so I walked into the Daily Bruin office and I asked if I could write a response. That turned into a point-counterpoint column, which eventually turned into me doing a regular column for the UCLA Daily Bruin. After about a year of that, I was 17, I went to my dad, and he'd been reading my stuff, and I said, Dad, do you think my stuff is good enough to be in like a regular paper? And he said, yeah, let me do some research. So he went on the internet, he found Creator Syndicate, which was the syndicator for David Limbaugh and Mona Charen and Molly Ivins and a bunch of folks from both sides of the political aisle. And I applied blind. I just sent in my columns with the bio. And they didn't even really know how old I was. They knew I was young. They didn't know I was quite that young. And 3 weeks later, I got a call from them saying they wanted to syndicate my column. So at 17, I became the youngest syndicated column in the country. My parents had to sign the contract because under California law, I wasn't age of consent. Quickly upon doing that, I'm sort of a go-getter when it comes to PR. So I proceeded to email a bunch of folks for blurbs for the press kit. And one of the people I emailed was David Limbaugh, right, Rush's brother and the author of Absolute Power and a bunch of other bestsellers. And David said, you know, you not only are talented, if you write a book, I'd be happy to agent it for you. So I'd been taking notes, you know, in class, diligent notes. I'm a good student, but beyond that, I was interested in this. I'd been taking notes on what my professors were saying, writing down dates, times, specific quotations, and in about 3 weeks, I wrote the whole book. I wrote Brainwashed in about 3 weeks from all of my notes during the summer between junior and senior years. David pitched it around. Thomas Nelson decided to publish it, and halfway through my senior year of college, while I was still there, it came out, and I can say some of the professors were not particularly happy. I remember the Daily Bruin did a huge spread on it, trying to debunk the book. Yeah, it did very well, and I stand by it, obviously. So.
And the foreword to Brainwashed was written by David Limbaugh. Ben Shapiro, can you fall into a trap of being selective in the incidences you pick?
Sure. I mean, that book's anecdotal. I do cite a number of polls. I mean, I don't think there's any question that every poll ever done of major universities shows that professors are significantly more to the left than the general population. At UCLA, it was in the 2000 election, they voted almost universally for Al Gore, whereas the population obviously split about 50-50 in that election cycle. The universities are very much to the left. But of course, stories are more interesting than statistics. I'm not a Gallup pollster. And so the book is not just a compendium of polls. It does have polls to kind of back up what I'm saying as evidence. But yeah, I do call out specific professors and name them by name and talk about the things that they've said in class. In a way, it was sort of the first book of its kind because it went inside the classroom. It presaged a lot of other books that have been like that, where it's not only experiences from within the classroom, but direct quotations from professors, dates, times, what they said. And I think a lot of folks want to know, especially I went to UCLA, places like UCLA, you know, what are my tax dollars funding? And so it was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of folks.
In Brainwashed, you write, the brainwashing of students by the university system is one of the most severe problems plaguing America's youth. Under higher education's facade of objectivity lies a grave and overpowering bias, a bias that deeply affects the student body. To find viable solutions to this crisis, we must now answer three crucial underlying questions. Why are the universities so biased? Why do the students take their professors at face value? And what can we do to stop it? What's the answer, your answer to those questions?
Well, I mean, let's go through them one at a time. So the first one, if I'm recalling correctly, was why are the universities so biased in the first place? And one of the reasons that the universities are biased is because folks at the university level in the 1960s the universities were largely infiltrated by a lot of folks on the New Left. The establishment at those universities decided not to challenge the student body when the student body kind of rose up in the 1960s. And a lot of the very bad ideas that had started earlier in the 1930s and 40s ended up taking over the universities in the 1960s. Most professors don't actually have to live in the real world, so to speak. They don't have to get a job outside the university setting. They live in a kind of an echo chamber where they can't distinguish between opinion and fact. And so everything that disagrees with them becomes unfactual, non-factual. It's a lie. George W. Bush didn't disagree with them on politics. He was a liar. Everybody who disagrees with them in the classroom didn't disagree. It's because they were just liars. And that's because when they go back to the faculty lounge, everybody agrees with them virtually universally. And then it's once it became left, then it's self-perpetuating because you have to work with the professors who are there in order to get your doctorate. And I can guarantee you that if you're at UCLA and you would really, really like to write your doctoral thesis on how gun control is completely ineffective, you're going to have a lot more trouble than if you write your doctoral thesis on how gun control is supremely effective and the only solution to solving the problem of gun violence in America. So that's the answer to question number one. Question number two, why do they have all this authority? The answer to that's pretty simple. Most parents are spending thousands and thousands of dollars on their kids going to these schools. I mean, my parents spent a lot of money on me to go to UCLA. And so that means that kind of the authority that your parents have is now transferred over to this new group of people who are of the older generation typically, and who are going to speak to you from a position of knowledge and authority. After all, you go to college to learn. So as a student, you also know that the best way to get an A is to go in and basically vomit back out everything that the professor told you in class, put it back in. I mean, if you actually, look, I got great grades in college, which is how I ended up at Harvard Law. One of the reasons for that is that if you read my blue books, I write like a communist. Right? I mean, they're all done with your student ID number. Thank God for anonymity. I would speak in class, and then when it came time for the test, I always say this to conservative students: don't waste a grade. It's not worth getting a C in a class. Get an A in the class, and then the degree is worth something. So that's the reason for number two. As far as number three, you know, how that changes, how the bias on university campuses changes. You know, the most optimistic solution would be that the universities open themselves up. That's not going to happen because, again, when you live, it's not even a malicious thing. When you live in that echo chamber, you think of people who disagree with you as deniers, right? This is the whole climate change deniers. You're somebody who denies the power of Keynesian economics. You're not somebody who disagrees. You're somebody who denies. So the only way really to do this would be to exercise the power of the market. Eventually, parents are going to have to stop sending their kids to schools that they disagree with on a political level. They're going to have to instead either take that money and spend. I mean, there are people who are doing this now. Take that money, that $100,000. And start a business for your kid, have the kid run the business, or send your kid to a school that you have more agreement with. And alumni are going to have to start realizing that the money that they're sending there is not just going to the football team's helmets. Very often it's going to the Marxist professor who sits in the front of the class and plays guitar while he sings communist anthems, which actually happened while I was in geography class at UCLA. So there are a lot of ways to tackle it, but I always prefer market solutions to any sort of other solutions.
From Brainwashed, Michigan State University holds separate graduation ceremonies for black students. The University of Michigan has ceremonies for black, Latino, American Indian, and Jewish students, with each ceremony focusing on the customs of that group. UCLA is the center for separate graduation ceremonies. The university holds a graduation for homosexual students, which they call the lavender graduation. At that commencement, students wear rainbow tassels. There is also a graduation for Latinos, a graduation for blacks, a graduation for Filipinos, a graduation for Asian Pacific Islanders, a graduation for Iranians, and a graduation for American Indians. About the only ones who don't have their own graduation are straight white males, but they will before long, if only by process of elimination.
And this is the polarization of American society that I was talking about that I think carries over from the universities to, President Obama's politics, the kind of the separation of the American population away from the melting pot idea and into what essentially is a bag of marbles, right? We're all separate and we live in our own spheres, and it's a self-segregation that has really done a lot of damage to American life. If diversity is supposed to be about associating with folks on campus, go to a campus sometime. There's not a ton of diversity going on. People hang out with people who are like them. If you go to the student group where people hang out with people like you, this is the way it was, for me. When I was there, I hung out with a lot of folks in class, but when it came time to be out of class, you tend to gravitate toward the people who are like you. To use state resources to push that, though, is another idea, and that's where I really start to get upset, because I think that if we are to learn from one another, if we are to experience life as Americans first, rather than as blacks or Jews or gays or Asians, then we're going to have to at some point realize that we're allowed to graduate together. That's okay. We can hang out on our own time together, but when it comes time for the state to sponsor a graduation at UCLA, why don't we all just get in the same room together? Because after all, this is a rite of passage as Americans, and it's a rite of passage in our growth as human beings.
So, Ben Shapiro, you were about 18 years old when you wrote Porn Generation. Where did this book come from?
I started it when I was 18 years old. I really wrote it when I was about 20. It was right after Brainwashed. This book came from, I would say, moral opprobrium about what I'd seen on campus, as well as what I was seeing in the culture. As an Orthodox Jew and someone who's a deep religious believer, I was upset with the kind of culture that's been awash in not only basic immorality, but in imagery that I felt was damaging to teenagers, imagery that I felt was damaging to young adults, and a culture that tries to inculcate perennial adolescence in the American population, that makes you feel that avoiding responsibility is almost a sort of responsibility. You have a moral superiority if you are promiscuous as opposed to if you are a virgin. There's a lot of pressure to participate in culturally approved of activities which generally involve exploring yourself, and exploring yourself invariably ends up being something that your parents would not want you to do, and generally it involves withdrawing money from your parents' ATM account in order for you to do something that your parents would not want you to do. So that was what I objected to, and that's what I wrote about in Porn Generation, which revolves around the sexual sexual liberation of the American population, ranging from pop music to movies to magazines to what happens on campus.
You discussed the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky affair in here. Why?
Well, the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky affair is a really interesting test case, because there were actual studies that were done in the aftermath of that about awareness about oral sex, for example. And it rose dramatically, of course, among teenagers, because the President of the United States was being talked about on television every night as somebody who participated in oral sex in the Oval Office. That was something that actually had an impact on a full generation of kids who suddenly were being told that oral sex was not actual sex, it was sort of fake sex. And people took that in, and people imitate folks who they think are important in the culture. It's true across the board, from celebrities to politicians. And in America, since our celebrities have become politicians and our politicians have become celebrities, you're seeing that crossover have a real market impact on how young people live their lives. And the idea that it does no damage is just ridiculous. Of course it does damage. Everything that you do in life has some impact on you. We're not all just a bunch of icemen walking around, and all of our activities have no impact on us whatsoever. They all have an impact. They have a spiritual impact. They have brain impacts. They have lifelong impacts in terms of your personal history. We all do things that we regret. We all do things that we wish we hadn't done. But the more that we have a culture that tries to minimize those things and keep us, the learned wisdom of the ages, sometimes it's wrong, but a lot of the time it's right. And throwing it away willy-nilly is an exercise in foolhardiness.
Portrayal of sexual activity on screen is not simply about telling a story or enlightening viewers. It's about legitimizing the behavior. When increasingly younger teens are exposed to soft pornography on the big screen, there is a cultural result.
And you have to give permission to teenagers to do something. I mean, how is it that teenagers decide suddenly that it's okay to participate in certain activities when it wasn't okay before? When you subsidize an activity, you get more of it. Maybe we've decided as a society that it's okay to subsidize some of these activities, but there is a tremendous impact in terms of that. I mean, the most obvious example you can use for something like this is the impact of the culture's acceptance of, for example, single motherhood, the culture's unwed motherhood. The culture has largely accepted unwed motherhood. You may think that's a good thing, you may think that's a bad thing. It's certainly become a more common thing. In the black community, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, the unwed motherhood rate was somewhere near 30%. Now it's 72%. In the white community, it was in low single digits. Now it's up to 40%. That's a tremendous increase in a pretty short period of time, and that's largely due to a culture that has decided that it is no longer important to regulate your sexual urges. In fact, you're almost glorified if you participate in the animal as opposed to containing it. The religious viewpoint was always, at least in Judaism, was always that sexual activity is a wonderful thing, provided that it's within certain boundaries, namely the boundaries of marriage. But when it's liberated from that, all it ends up doing is making you, hollowing you out as a person. One of the things I object to in Porn Generation, I thought this was an original feminist point, is that men should not act like pigs. Unfortunately, the feminist movement sort of came along and noted, rightly, that men act like pigs. And instead of saying men ought to act more morally, they said, okay, now everyone should act immorally in the name of equality. And that's had a really marked ramification, especially for young women, whose sex does affect differently than men. Anyone who acts as though sex affects young women and young men exactly the same is just blind to the realities of life.
And you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2. This is our monthly in-depth program where we invite one author to come on and talk about his or her body of work. This month, it's author Ben Shapiro. He is the author of 5 nonfiction books, beginning with Brainwashed, How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth, 2004. Then Porn Generation, How Social Liberalism is Corrupting Our Future, came out the next year. Project President, Bad Hair and Botox on the Road to the White House, came out in 2008. Primetime Propaganda, The True Hollywood Story of How the Left Took Over Your TV, 2011. And his most recent book this year, Bullies, How the Left's Culture of Fear and Intimidation Silences Americans. He will be our guest for the next 2.5 hours, and we welcome your participation as well via phone calls. You can dial in if you have a question or comment for Mr. Shapiro, 202-585-3880 if you live in the East and Central time zones, 585-3881 for those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, and of course via social media as well. You can send an email to booktv@cspan.org, or you can make a comment on our Twitter page, @BookTV is our handle. And finally, Facebook, facebook.com/BookTV. You will see it right there at the top where you can make a comment for Mr. Shapiro. I want to go to Project President, Bad Hair and Botox on the Road to the White House. You write, many people believe that our style of campaigning is broken. Why, they ask, should John Kerry's $1,000 haircut decide who holds the most powerful office on the face of the earth? Shouldn't politics be about politics? Shouldn't policy be the crux of our campaigns and elections? What does it matter if Barry Goldwater looked kooky in glasses or if Michael Dukakis looked goofy in a tank? It matters, you say. Why?
It does, because this is human nature. I mean, one of my bugaboos, just as a human being, is people who argue with reality. And you can stand there arguing against the wind all day long. The fact is that people make a snap decision on who you are. Science shows this within a second of meeting you. They've decided whether they like you or not, whether they want to hang out with you or not. All of that is made within a second, and rarely do we change our opinions. It's pretty rare that somebody actually decides, after making that snap decision, that now they want to be your friend, if they decide they hate you within that first moment. This is why candidates are so perfectly... by the way, it's why the Democratic Party continues to win. The Republican Party has no clue how image-making works. I mean, in 2008, Barack Obama came down from the sky onto a stage with Greek columns, and he gave a speech in front of 60,000 people. And John McCain hunched over a podium in front of a lime green screen, and during the debates, he gripped his microphone. He white-knuckled it. If you're white-knuckling it, you're doing it wrong. Image matters when it comes to these things. The White House knows this. This is why people make fun of President Obama for the constant teleprompter. It's very smart. He understands exactly what he's doing. When he goes out and he is in a kindergarten, and then you pull the camera back, and he's got 2 teleprompters and a bunch of 6-year-olds sitting around him, it's easy to mock that. But at the same time, his audience, it ain't the 6-year-olds. His audience is all the folks out there watching on camera, just like it was. He was the first candidate to use the Iowa caucuses, a teleprompter at the Iowa caucuses. He was the fully TV-produced candidate, the first fully produced TV candidate maybe in American history. But Democrats have for a long time had not only tremendous respect for what Hollywood does and what image making is for, but they've had a willingness to use it, whereas virtually every Republican looks like an assistant high school principal.
Suits versus boots.
Well, the idea there is that Americans do like a cowboy. As much as, some folks on the left like to think that Americans are kind of anti-cowboy. George W. Bush, he was a cowboy. He was so terrible. The truth is Americans kind of like the rural feel. President Obama's unique. He didn't have any of that. He's obviously a city guy, but every president before him, for a very long time, had a ranch. This was something that it's just an oddity, but Reagan had a ranch, and then Bush Sr. had a ranch, although he didn't really use it very much, and obviously Clinton had a ranch, as well as George W. Bush. All these folks had this kind of rural feel, this kind of down-to-earth, nitty-gritty. You'd want to get a beer with them because they're somebody who'd really experienced rugged life. Whereas if you're a businessman, if you're Mitt Romney, you come off as somebody who no one wants to have dinner with Mitt. I don't know that Ann wants to have dinner with Mitt Romney. I mean, he's a very nice guy, really, and I respect him tremendously. He's maybe the most moral man ever to run for president. He's a tremendously moral person in his personal life, but nobody looks at Mitt Romney on that screen with the hair that a brick would bounce off of and says, that's somebody who is just down to earth. That's somebody who really understands people. And that's what hurt him. His image matched what people thought of him. Your image has to convey something about you. Bill Clinton's image conveyed that he was a good old boy from down south who really understood the troubles of regular folks, even though he was a Yaley. Right? George H.W. Bush, well, he's a bad example because he lost his re-election, only won his first election because he was Reagan's successor. But Reagan was a great example. He was a Hollywood guy who was originally from Illinois, and suddenly there he is out there chopping wood at the Reagan Ranch in Santa Barbara. That has an impact, a market impact on how people see you. And so I would always recommend to every politician, you may laugh at the image consultation, you may laugh at those guys who go out and shop for you and want to give you a better haircut. It's going to matter because when you get on camera, that's pretty much all that matters. If you look like you got a dead cat on your hat, you're gonna lose.
American voters have always understood that when they elect presidents, they elect complete individuals. And that means that we worry about hair. We think about height. We contemplate whether a candidate is a suit or a boot. We ponder over candidates' military images. We worry about youth and inexperience. And we worry about age and decrepitude. We wonder about candidate spouses. We ask ourselves whether the candidates are beer buddies or stiffs. It all seems so trivial. It isn't. Ben Shapiro, I want to go back to the point you made that we make snap judgments within a minute or so of what we think of that person.
That, I think, it's the problem of American politics. It's also just how human nature is. It's the problem with democracy in general. More often than not, we make good decisions. That's why I'm a believer, as Winston Churchill was, that this is the worst system except for all the others. The idea that we make those snap decisions, it's worthless to ignore it. So if more candidates would focus on that, we could actually get past the image making. See, this is the irony of it. If we all focused on the image making, if all candidates got up there, they looked equally handsome, they looked equally well kept, they'd really thought this stuff through, then maybe we could get down to the politics of it. But the fact is that even George Washington understood this. When George Washington walked into that first Continental Congress, he was the only man who walked in a full military uniform. He walked in with his old French and Indian uniform on because he was lobbying to be the first commander-in-chief before there was a commander-in-chief in the country. All of these guys thought about this, and if the politicians today are smart, they will think about it as well without painting themselves orange like John Boehner and looking like an overgrown Oompa Loompa.
In Project President, you write about William Henry Harrison and how he won. How?
He bought folks a lot of beer. I mean, they called him. He was a military leader, and so he campaigned on this platform of I'm a military leader. I'm tougher than nails, and it's what ended up really killing him, right? I mean, he went out in the rain to prove how tough he was, and then he ended up dying after 40 days. But he bought folks a lot of beer. He went out and actually would swig beer at the rallies. He would stand out in the rain swigging beer at the rallies with people, and then they would realize, oh, he's not just some old guy. He's somebody who's like us. He's somebody who likes beer. And I mean, if it mattered as early as 1840, that only increased in kind of scope once we reach the age of television, where everybody is in your living room all the time. And so you sort of feel like you want to be friends with the candidate even more so than you did back in 1840 when you probably never saw William Henry Harrison.
And finally, your one other book we haven't talked about yet, Primetime Propaganda, the true Hollywood story of how the left took over your TV. Start by telling us about your experience as a screenwriter for TV.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I started writing this book before I was even interested in doing screenwriting. In fact, that was pretty much the last thing I wanted to do. When I was a kid, both my parents worked in Hollywood. I mentioned my mom does business affairs on a lot of major TV shows. My dad composes for film and TV. And so both of them were in Hollywood. My cousin is Mara Wilson, who's the star of Miracle on 34th Street. She lived a block away. So, the whole family was kind of involved in the Hollywood industry. That was something I desperately did not want to do. And more than that, my parents really didn't want me to do that when I was a kid, and somebody asked if I could be in a commercial. My dad said, Are you crazy? Absolutely not. He can't be in a commercial. So when I started writing this book, what I did to do the book, and this was kind of funny, it just shows how people's biases creep up on them without them knowing it, is I called up a bunch of folks in Hollywood. I mean, I'd written 3 books already when I wrote this book, and I'd had a syndicated column for 10 years. I said, you know, I'm writing this book about the most prominent people in television. I'm a Harvard Law School graduate. My name is Ben Shapiro. I'm from Los Angeles. I'd like to interview you. And virtually all of them granted the interview. I imagine that for a lot of those folks, it's because they saw a couple things. Harvard Law School, Ben Shapiro, so Jewish name, from Harvard Law School, lives in Los Angeles, got to be a liberal, right? 99% shot that this person is going to be of the left. So I would go in and I'd do interviews with folks. I would wear the Harvard Law baseball cap to reinforce the impression. When I would do the interviews, I would ask questions from a progressive viewpoint. So instead of asking if they were stacking their shows with liberal propaganda, like a right-wing person would, I would go and I would ask if they felt that they were if they were infusing enough social justice perspectives into their shows. That's how you get an honest answer, is you pretend to be a friend of the person, or at least you act as though you're on their side. This is what's great about being a partisan journalist. I can do all that. So I went in and did all of that. One of the people I interviewed was a guy named Leonard Goldberg. And Leonard is the other half of Spelling Goldberg. He was the guy who was behind Charlie's Angels, and recently he did the movie Unknown. He did the remake of Charlie's Angels. He does Blue Bloods on CBS. He's a real powerhouse, kind of an icon in the industry. Well, he and I actually hit it off because he's very pro-Israel. He recognized I was very pro-Israel, so he asked me to go ahead and write up a pilot about Harvard Law School, which I did. And Leonard, then we worked on it. We went through several meetings, and like every other project in Hollywood, eventually it got shelved. In the meantime, I went and I got an agent, the agent started getting some spec scripts that I'd written around town. One day I got a call from the agent, and the agent says, you know, we have a problem here. And I said, okay, what's the problem? He says, well, we got one of your spec scripts out to
For the Good
producer.
Wife, right?
Yeah, it was for The Good Wife, to one of the producers. The producer, I can't remember which show it was for, but the producer, it was one of the major studios, called us back, and they really liked your script, but then they Googled you, and they saw your political viewpoint, and they said, I will never work with somebody of that political viewpoint. And I was stunned by the honesty of that. I mean, I'm glad the person was honest about it. At least they weren't lying and saying that it was because the writing was bad. But that is what a lot of folks in Hollywood have to encounter. Now, it was no skin off of my nose. I make a living doing other things. I always have. I probably always will. But it shows the extent to which bias in Hollywood is accepted and dealt with on kind of a normal day-to-day level. People in Hollywood, again, like the university, it's an insular industry. You get jobs through people that you know for the most part. And so if you're not invited to the good cocktail parties, it's a good shot you're not going to get a job on the show. If there's one slot left in that writer's room, and it's either going to go to a Republican Jew from North Hollywood, or it's going to go to a liberal Hispanic woman, and they're even close to equal, the liberal Hispanic woman will probably get the job, because they assume that the Republican is going to be more abrasive in the writer's room, even if there's no evidence of that.
Ben Shapiro, how did Friends, how does The Big Bang Theory, how do they contribute to liberalism on TV? Well,
I mean, they're all wonderful shows. I mean, listen, my wife is a huge Friends fan, and when I was dating her, I bought all 10 seasons of Friends for her, and you know, she's an addict of The Big Bang Theory. All these shows are great. All the writers who make them are incredibly talented. The way that it contributes is in a way that's much more insidious than normal politics. Normal politics nobody pays attention to. People have their values shaped by the people that they know. And what TV does is it creates a set of friends for you. It creates people you want to hang out with. In fact, you tune in every week to hang out with these folks, unlike your family where they just stop by and bother you. But you know, people who you actually are going to physically change the channel to hang out with. And then what Hollywood does is they have these people do things that you had always thought were kind of eh. You know, they have people engage in behavior that you had always thought was not particularly appropriate. And then comes the point where you say, yeah, but I like that person. I like that person, so that means that I have to approve of the behavior that they're exhibiting. And so what's fascinating about this is that when conservatives say this sort of thing, they're portrayed as, oh, it's Jerry Falwell, or it's Jerry Falwell and the Teletubbies, it's Dan Quayle and Murphy Brown. Well, when Dan Quayle said about Murphy Brown that Murphy Brown was legitimizing unwed motherhood, right, he was raked over the coals. Later, of course, Candace Bergen agreed with him and said that's exactly what it did. But when Joe Biden says that Will and Grace maybe was the single biggest step forward for gay rights in the country's history, right, then everybody kind of accepts that because it's true. Joe Biden is right, and Dan Quayle was right. Everybody was right about this. Hollywood has an impact. Do they do it consciously? Do they do it unconsciously? It's some half and half. Sometimes they do it consciously, and they really want to put forward a certain narrative. When I talked to Marta Kaufman, who's, you know, a very left person. She's doing a fundraiser for President Obama September 9th in LA. When I talked to Marta about Friends, there's a lesbian, they had a lesbian wedding. I think it was season 2. Was it season 1 or season 2 of the show? And I said, you know, what prompted that? She said, well, we had next door neighbors and they had a daughter and they were lesbian and she was there and we wanted to make the daughter feel good, and so we specifically wrote that in with kind of politics in mind. And she said, yeah, of course the entire writer's room was very much to the left. So some of it is more conscious, some of it is unconscious, some of it is that sometimes leftist lines work better. But I can tell you this, that if you are trying to write a villain in Hollywood, you're going to be far better off writing a corporate white villain than you are going to be writing a government villain from a, you know, for example, a liberal government, or writing an Arab terrorist as a villain, right? This is what 24 learned when they had to run an apology prompted by CARE, when Kiefer Sutherland had to get on the TV and explain to Americans, as though we're all morons, that all Muslims are not terrorists, as though by watching 24 we were all going to go and start burning down mosques, which is an absurdity. But this is what Hollywood does, and it's very clever. It's very effective. It's why people's opinions have changed. It's why the single best argument for gay marriage always is not even an argument, it's an emotional appeal. Don't you have a gay member of your family? Don't you have a gay friend? Don't you have sympathy for that gay person? Well, then you should allow them to get married. Right? It's not even an argument about the pros and cons of gay marriage. It's about you love this person, therefore you should be okay with what they do. That's what TV does, in a nutshell. That's what TV is all about. They identify villains as people that you hate, even if you might like their politics. Right? I mean, just like any other. Look, I think business does a tremendous amount in this country, but I hate the villain on Law and Order just as much as any other person. If it turns out that he's a business person and he murdered someone. So it's insidious, it's clever, it's highly effective, and it's something that any informed viewer should know about, as well as I think it's something that the right should engage in. The right has no ability to storytell. The left has perfected the art of storytelling. They're great storytellers. President Obama, in a political way, is a fantastic storyteller. He likes to tell a story. And this gets actually into the theme of bullies a little bit, which is that for folks on the left, like President Obama, every political issue is a story. Right? It's not a set of policies. It's not a set of evidence. It's not a pro and con argument. It's a story. He is the white hat. You are the black hat. He is the good guy. You are the villain. Right? And by doing that, that has a tremendous impact on the voting population, because everybody. The truth is, all American voters vote no. They don't vote yes. They vote no. They vote based on what they don't like. Right? Just like when you watch a movie, you actually sympathize with the character based on who you don't like. In Star Wars, you don't care. Luke Skywalker is the most boring character who ever was. He's a whiny teenager on Tatooine. That's why they open the movie with Darth Vader, right? You have a huge, interesting villain, and he breaks through a door, and he strangles an innocent guy right off the bat. And then you know, when they cut to Luke, okay, now here's your hero. Even if he's whiny, even if he kisses his sister, he's still going to be he's your hero. This is your villain. So painting the villain is what's very effective. The left has used that in both television, and they've also used it in politics to tremendous effect. The right continues to dither and pretend as though none of this matters. So in primetime propaganda, Ben Shapiro, you write 3 words: I love television. Is this a call to action for conservatives? I think it is. It's a call to action in a certain way. I do love television. I watch a lot of it. You know, I was a Lost addict. I like Homeland. There's a great Canadian TV show, by the way. Everybody should pick it up. It's called Slings and Arrows. It's fantastic. It's about Shakespeare. But yes, conservatives need to get active in the storytelling medium. It's what works. Conservatives need to stop sitting at, oh, look at those crazy Hollywood people. Look how stupid they are. Obama out there with Beyonce and Jay-Z. Look at all these idiot actors. Jamie Foxx up there at the March on Washington and the mall. You know, that's so ineffective. It's so silly. Storytelling is God uses storytelling, okay? As a biblical Jew, God uses storytelling. It's why God tells a story. All of Genesis is a story. All of the first 5 books, the 5 books of Moses, those are all a story. All of Nevi'im, the prophets, all of it's a story. God uses stories, you know, for Christians in the New Testament, God uses parables. The stories are tremendously effective. They have emotional connection. They have a lot more connection than Paul Ryan sitting there reading his budget plan like an accountant at a table with a briefcase. Ben Shapiro is our guest for the next 2 hours and 15 minutes. 202 is the area code. 585-3880 is the area code. Is the number. Sorry about that. 585-3881 if you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zone. I want to begin with this email that we received from Bill in Medina, Washington. Since the left will not engage in a serious intellectual discussion with the haters
quote-unquote haters, and the media will not call them out on this, how do we point out their bullying tactics to the broader public without sounding like crybabies?
Well, I think that the important thing is to expose the tactic itself. So it's not about attacking people as jerks, because that's ineffective. What it is about is making clear what the magic trick here is, that they're arguing character instead of policy. And arguing character instead of policy actually is a nasty thing. If you say to someone that they're a racist and you have no evidence that they're a racist, that makes you a nasty person, and it's not wrong of them to say, you know what, that's nasty. And it's nasty of you to say that I'm a racist without evidence. That is a necessary thing. The right has to do that on a regular basis. When you know, somebody from the right appears on George Stephanopoulos on ABC News, it would behoove that person to say, George, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Before we start, I just want to point out, you're a man of the left. You're somebody, you portray yourself as an objective journalist. You were in the Clinton war room. We understand that you have certain principles that you believe in. Why can't you just be honest about what you are? I'm a conservative, you're a liberal, now let's have an honest conversation. The problem with George Stephanopoulos is that destroys his entire credibility base. I mean, and he wouldn't accept the premise. But that's something that needs to be done on a regular basis. I just want folks to be honest. If you're on the left, admit you're on the left if you portray yourself as an objective journalist. If you're on the right, admit that you're on the right. I'm on the right. You know, I'm a journalist, but I'm on the right, and I'm an opinion journalist. And that means that, you know, I take a certain view of the issues, and I make very clear up front if you read any of my stuff, you know, you're going to get a pretty good angle on who I am and what I believe. It's important to point that out, especially when it comes to the media. When it comes to politics, if somebody is race baiting, it's important to say that this person is race baiting, and not only are they race baiting, it's a nasty tactic. You don't get to attack somebody's character without evidence. That's the definition of being a nasty person. So if they're calling you nasty, then they have to show evidence as to why you're nasty. It can't just be the left calling you, you know, a villain because you support voter ID, or because you oppose affirmative action, or because you oppose gay marriage. And this is not something that is restricted to the broader political world, you know, where big figure fights big figure, and it's Romney versus Obama, and we're all watching. It applies at the dinner table too. I mean, we've all had dinner. Look, I'm Jewish. That means my entire extended family is liberal. So we've all had Thanksgiving dinner, you know, with Aunt Bertha, who firmly believes that you're a nasty human being if you voted in favor of Proposition 8 in California. The answer to that is that I'm not a nasty person. How dare you suggest that I'm a nasty person? In fact, you're a nasty, intolerant bigot if you think that I'm a nasty person, because you have no evidence that I'm anti-gay. And for you to suggest that just because I disagree with you on a matter of public policy, I'm a bad person, that's what makes you a bad person. And then we can get all that off the table. Once we get the character attacks off the table, then we can actually get down to the hard business of forging policy that's actually good for Americans. But if we're still going to be stuck in this political trap where one side argues character and the other side argues policy, the side that argues character will always win. Character is always a more effective argument than policy. It almost doesn't matter what the policy is. If you argue character, you are going to win right off the bat. And until the right acknowledges this, understands this, and fights back on the same level, it sounds like fighting fire with fire. It is. You have to do that. If you have to tug at the heartstrings. Once you do that, then hopefully there will be a mutually assured destruction that sets in, and both sides will say, okay, look, character's off the table. Let's figure out what's the best way to do this. May the best argument win.
Ben Shapiro, what's your connection to Andrew Breitbart?
Andrew and I were friends going back for a very long time. I met Andrew when I was writing for the Daily Bruin, so I think I was about 17. And I got an email from this guy named Andrew, who didn't even sign his last name. And he said, you know, I work with Matt Drudge. I read your column in the UCLA newspaper, because Andrew used to go down into Westwood and pick up, he lived in Westwood, he would go down into Westwood, pick up the UCLA paper, and he said, who's this crazy right-winger who's writing for the liberal paper at UCLA? He emailed me, and he said, why don't we get together? I said, sure. We ended up at a greasy taco joint. I couldn't eat anything, I keep kosher, so I watched Andrew chow down on tacos while he talked about his theory of the media. And we were friends for a solid 10 years after that, before he hired me at Breitbart. Right after he hired me about 3 weeks before he passed away. When he hired me, he called it the longest flirtation in political history, because we've been friends for a very long time. He'd given me advice. I tried to help him out, and he was a wonderful human being. I mean, leaving aside what he was politically, which was iconic, he was a wonderful human being. He was also a tremendous populist. He's somebody who appreciated people. I don't know anybody, left or right, who actually spent time with Andrew who didn't like Andrew. And that was because Andrew at heart was not really political. I mean, the book is dedicated, Bullies is dedicated to Andrew, because more than anything else, Andrew disliked bullies. Andrew was not even that conservative on a lot of policies. When it came to social policy, Andrew really didn't care that much. When it came to fiscal policy, Andrew was interested, but really not on a supremely deep level. He wasn't a wonk. He wasn't somebody that you would invite on to you know, the ABC News Roundtable and you'd be discussing the vagaries of Obamacare. That wasn't who Andrew was. What Andrew was is he's somebody who understood the tactics of the left. He understood how they were making their arguments. He understood pop culture, and he understood how regular folks think and why the right was losing all the regular Joes out there while they were arguing abstruse theory at the think tanks.
Did you get your political leanings from your parents?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think everybody's parents have a tremendous impact on them. I'm extraordinarily tight with my parents. I'm very, very tight with my dad. He's my best friend outside my wife. And my father and I are very, very close. He and my mom were both Reagan Republicans. They voted for Carter in '76. They voted for Reagan twice. They voted for Clinton in '92 because they didn't like Bush selling AWACS to the Saudis. Then they shifted back to the right side of the aisle after they saw Clinton trying to expand government. Also because they saw that Clinton was not nearly as pro-Israel as he had portrayed himself to be early on in his campaign. So my parents were conservative. I grew up in a religious household, so that means that you're kind of default conservative. I became more conservative as time went on, as I informed myself about topic areas that were not really in my family's wheelhouse, economics. You know, my family I would say that they were more foreign policy and socially conservative than fiscally conservative, although just like everybody else in the country, they're not huge fans of higher taxes, but they weren't, you know, economic gurus in any sense. They didn't sit around the table reading Milton Friedman. But they always brought, they brought us up, me and my three younger sisters, they brought us up in a very, very patriotic way. I mean, my earliest memories are of watching the musical 1776. My dad writes musicals. I'm still a huge musicals fan. You know, and dressing up every Purim. Purim is like the Jewish equivalent of Halloween, sort of, in that we all dress up when we go to synagogue. I used to dress up every Purim in a full-out John Adams regalia, white wig, red coat, short stockings, the whole deal. So I grew up with that kind of patriotic sensibility, and then as I got older, it sort of naturally inclined me toward being more conservative.
Is there a political split among Orthodox Jews, as you say you are, and non-Orthodox
Absolutely.
Jews?
Absolutely. Orthodox Jews vote really, really heavily Republican. They vote solid 80% Republican. Conservative Reform Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, they vote pretty much the opposite. They vote 90% Democrat. And there's a reason for that, which is that, unfortunately, most Jews are not really connected to any of the tradition. I mean, there's two types of Judaism. There's ethnic Judaism. You know, you're born of a Jewish mother, therefore you're Jewish, right? Noam Chomsky's a Jew. And then there is, you actually care about Judaism as a set of beliefs and values and as a philosophy, as what in Hebrew we call the hashkafa, right? Like a philosophy. That most Jews do not believe in. They don't believe in the hashkafa. They believe in the gefilte fish, and they believe in the bagels, and they believe in going to synagogue once a year, maybe, and fasting till noon on Yom Kippur. And they like being considered a minority. There are a lot of Jews out there who don't want to be considered part of the, you know, they don't want to be them white folks. They want to be a minority because you get special status in America for being a minority. But they don't really have much to do with Judaism beyond just the cultural aspect of it. And that's an aspect of Judaism the ethnic aspect of Judaism I'm not particularly interested in. So when people ask why are Jews liberal, the answer is most Jews don't have anything to do with Judaism. It's like asking why are so many people who are born into Christian households liberal? Well, because a lot of them are not, you know, religiously or fervently Christian. They're not evangelical. They're not Catholic. They may be lapsed. So ethnic Judaism is measuring a different measure than belief in Judaism. Traditional, believing, biblical Jews who there are really two indicators that you're a believing biblical Jew. Usually it's that you keep Sabbath and that you keep kosher. Those are really kind of the two behavioral indicators. If you do those two things, then those people are the folks who are going to vote at least 75 to 80% Republican. And they do it for a variety of reasons, ranging from what has become, it's an amazing transition in America, where the Republican Party has become the pro-Israel party, and the Democratic Party, unfortunately, is moving away from kind of the stronger pro-Israel position. It ranges from that issue to issues of social morality, where the Orthodox community is much more conservative than the conservative Reform Reconstructionist community, who are much more socially liberal and believe that Judaism is inherently about social justice rather than the standards laid forth in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, which is the oral Torah, and in the written Torah.
In your columns on Breitbart.com, you talk about the president and Syria. What's your take?
There are really three choices in Syria. There is yes, there is no, and then there is the worst option available. President Obama has chosen the worst option available. The yes would be go in, take out the Assad regime as a warning to the Iranians. That's really what this is about, because why else? The weapons of mass destruction red line was drawn as a warning to the Iranians, not really as even a warning to the Syrians, because 100,000 people have already been killed. And I don't know that any of the people who are dead care that they were killed by a bullet as opposed to by sarin gas. The point of the red line on weapons of mass destruction was clearly as a warning to the Iranians. If you go in and you lob a few cruise missiles and break a few things, and Assad stays in power, and then you do nothing else, then you will end up with the Iranians being further emboldened. So that's sort of the worst of both positions. If you were to take, I'm on the no side, by the way. If on the yes side, you know, is the argument against Iran. And my feeling on that is, okay, if you really want to make an argument against Iran, depose the Iranian regime. You don't fight a proxy war with a country that you could take in a heartbeat. I mean, the United States would defeat them militarily very, very easily. It would not be a huge bloodbath. It would not be Vietnam. And there actually is a viable opposition in Iran, which is much stronger than the viable whatever opposition there was to Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So I don't believe that we should be fighting a proxy war in Syria with a thug like Assad. On the other side, you know, I don't understand what exactly the exit strategy is, even if we get in and take out Assad. If Al-Qaeda is linked with the rebels, which all evidence shows they are, despite the fact we've been sending them guns, if Al-Qaeda takes over there, and we're worried about chemical weapons use, and we're worried about terrorists with chemical weapons, and Al-Qaeda takes over, then Al-Qaeda would be in charge of the chemical weapons in Syria. So unless we have an ability to take out all of the weapons of mass destruction depots in Syria, or have the willingness to do that, then this is a fool's errand.
Ben Shapiro is our guest. Patricia is in Beaver, Pennsylvania. Good afternoon, Patricia.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a mother of 5, and 2 of whom are in college. And I am a Republican because of the social policies of life and respect for marriage, so conservative. I'm curious, what has been the response of Ben's peers to the books that he's put out there, you know, which I think are, you know, really naming a spade, you know, but that Hollywood is manipulating the opinion of the United States through the programming, and that, yes, I agree that the Democrats really have been able to work the media because they know it's social, you know, physical appeal that people really look for, which kind of makes me concerned. We sound like we're very shallow.
All right. Patricia, thank you. Mr. Shapiro?
Oh, well, I mean, the response of young people has been pretty mixed. You have, you know, religious young people who fully agree with everything I say, and then you have other young people who are more libertarian and liberal in sort of their construction of these issues. I think that what you're seeing overall is that the American public and young people as well, are getting more pro-life at the same time that they're also getting more pro-gay marriage. I've recommended to folks who are socially conservative that the issue of marriage be totally taken out of the realm of the government entirely. Straight marriage, gay marriage, the entire thing. I don't know a single person who's gotten married for the tax benefit. I certainly didn't get married because I thought that it would, you know, look good on my property records. The whole point of getting married is not only the relationship between you and your wife, but the production of children and the raising of children. And I think that, unfortunately, the right lost the gay marriage issue 40 years ago, and now they're trying to kind of hold on with their fingernails on the marriage issue. But the marriage issue was lost a long time ago, and the statistics prove it. The only way that you're going to win back the marriage issue is in the culture. I think that folks on the right are warming up to that message. As far as young people, I think that young people are young. I'm not of the opinion that every young person knows what they're doing, especially until they've paid taxes. So I've never been a fan of the kind of leftist notion that young people have all the answers. When President Obama trots out 7-year-olds to talk about gun control, my usual answer is that I don't understand why 7-year-olds should be making policy, or we would have a federal ban on homework. So when young people disagree with certain social policies, I'm not sure that's evidence that social policies are bad so much as it is that young people are impressionable, don't have, you know, tremendous life experience, and unfortunately that adolescence is lasting longer and longer. People who are now 26 are being called kids. 26 used to be you were 8 years out of the military. I mean, the idea that you were a 26-year-old adult living at home in your parents' basement smoking dope and being on their Obamacare was something that's something that has been pushed by the left for a long time, the increased dependency. And the more dependent you are, the nice thing is that the less you actually have to worry about the consequences of your actions. You know, in Judaism, when you hit 13, you are now responsible for your own sins. In America, until you hit 30, you're not responsible for your own taxes.
Les is in Bayside, New York. Les, you're on with author Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Shapiro, does he think that Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh are bullies, if they are bullies?
Stay on the line, Les.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think that it depends on the circumstance. I think that Rush, for all the talk about how he's a bully, is largely responding. And you get into a question here that folks in the media like to pose, is a cycle of violence. Who started it? Well, I would say that Rush was certainly not the first person to start the attacks on the other side. I think Rush is very clever at it. I think Rush is brilliant. I think that Rush is very good at what he does, and he's also an entertainer. I think that Bill O'Reilly is much the same. But I do think that both Rush and Bill O'Reilly are very obvious about the fact that they are opinion journalists, that they are folks on the right side of the aisle. And I see them as sort of, the right's equivalent. They're better at it, but they're the right's equivalent to the Chris Matthewses and the Al Sharptons on MSNBC. And that's what they should be. That's okay. That can all be there. In terms of the kind of bullying that I'm talking about, the name calling, and not only the name calling, the casting aspersions on someone's character for holding a certain political belief. In the main, I don't think that Rush and Bill O'Reilly are bullies. If you have specific instances, I'd be happier to talk about those.
Les, follow up?
Is Ann Coulter a bully? I find your position, I find you're simply an unfair person. You're blind to one side. I agree with you that some people on the left are bullies, but
Les, can you give
right-wingers are bullies.
Les, can you give an example of where you see Ben Shapiro being a bully?
Now, I don't know about that. I don't know enough about him. I've heard about him before, but the three people I cited are bullies. They're bullies to the Republican Party as well as to liberals. They're just simply bullies.
Thank you, sir.
And they've been bullies for many years, and for him to not note that is, I don't know.
Well, Les, as I've said, I truly believe that character attacks, there has to be a mutually assured destruction. If the right were to completely surrender any sort of responsive character attacks, it would continue to lose. The right is losing for specifically that reason. The left started this war on character. If the right refuses to engage in any sort of war on character, and that is folks like Rush, that's people like me, I do it too, that's people like Ann Coulter, then the right is going to lose. The right has to understand that character arguments matter, and if they're unwilling to make them, then we all end up as a bunch of assistant principal candidates from local districts in various states around the country, as opposed to a cohesive national party with a program to perform.
And Ann Coulter, who has been a guest on this program, blurbs Porn Generation. Ben Shapiro's writing is smart, informative, and incisive. He is wise beyond his years without losing the refreshing fearlessness of youth. Is Ann Coulter a friend of yours?
She is, yeah, and a sweetheart. I've known Ann since I was like 18. She's very funny. When I was first year at Harvard Law School, I remember she was on Hannity, what was then Hannity and Colmes, and this is right after Sandra Day O'Connor had stepped down from the Supreme Court, and there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court, and they asked her who she'd like for the Supreme Court, and she said me. I hadn't graduated from law school yet.
On Project President, this is, I think, my favorite blurb, simultaneously fascinating and hilarious. Tim Gunn,
yeah.
Project Runway. Is he a friend of yours?
I wouldn't call him a friend, but he's certainly a nice guy. I mean, I reached out to him because, well, for a couple reasons. One, all of my sisters love Project Runway. But the second is because Project President really is a markedly apolitical book. It's a book that was designed to reach out to Americans across the aisle and kind of illuminate some truths about how politics actually works in our minds as opposed to how we wish they work.
Ben Shapiro, who was the worst presidential candidate ever in your view?
Oh, well, Horace Greeley is definitely up there. Horace Greeley with the neckbeard and the huge whiskers, and he's from New York, and he was known as a copperhead beforehand. He was a terrible presidential candidate. In the modern era, somebody that people would know. Michael Dukakis was obviously a terrible presidential candidate. Bob Dole was a terrible presidential candidate. John McCain was a horrendous presidential candidate. I had my doubts about Mitt Romney to begin. I wouldn't put him up in the top 10 of horrible presidential candidates. But this century has seen a lot of really. Adlai Stevenson was a terrible presidential candidate. We've seen a lot of very, very bad presidential candidates. In the TV era, they're more visible, especially because all of their gaffes are now right in front of us all the time.
How did Jimmy Carter go from boots in '76 to suits?
Well, once you become the establishment, then things change a fair bit, right? Once you go from the charming peanut farmer from Georgia to the guy who is wearing sweaters in the Oval Office and lecturing Americans on what they should do with their air conditioners, you go to being a faceless bureaucrat very quickly, and that's what happened to Jimmy Carter. He was perceived as kind of the honest Joe who's going to come in. He won the '76 election basically on the strength of one statement: "I will never lie to you." And then by the time it hit 1980, it was pretty clear that even if he never lied to the American people, he just wasn't real good at his job. And Ronald Reagan provided a marked contrast. I mean, this is what folks on the right constantly miss. They act as though Reagan was just sunshine all the time. And if you watched anything from that 1980 campaign, you saw that Reagan was far from sunshine a lot of the time. Reagan was pretty viciously attacking Jimmy Carter as an incompetent, as somebody who really didn't know what he was doing, as somebody who was lost in foreign policy, and as somebody who was opening danger to American lives because of what he was doing with the Soviet Union. He wasn't afraid to make attacks on Jimmy Carter. And that contrast allowed him to win. There's something else that people forget about Reagan winning in 1980, and this, I think, is something that conservatives really need to take into account. Bad economies do not help Republicans. Bad economies help liberals. This is why FDR was able to win 4 separate elections while having the worst economy in American history. This is why Jimmy Carter, that's why that election was close in the latter days. Everyone thought that gap was closing. It only ended up being a blowout because of Afghanistan and because of the Iranian hostage crisis. Based on the economy, in early polling, Carter was well ahead. If you go back to March of 1980, Carter was leading Reagan by a pretty wide margin. So in this last election cycle, and I was screaming this from the rooftops at the time, people were saying, oh, Mitt Romney, all he has to do is just campaign on the bad economy. All he has to do is just look at Barack Obama and point to him and say, there, that guy's terrible on economics. Well, no, because more people out of work means more people who need unemployment benefits. And everybody who's still working thinks the economy isn't that bad because they still have a job. So for the most part, bad economies don't hurt Democrats, they help Democrats. One of the things that's been plaguing the Republican Party is lack of an enemy. And when I say lack of an enemy, I mean that before the fall of the Soviet Union was the kind of cohering glue in the Republican Party. It's what stuck together those 3 legs of social conservatism, fiscal conservatism, and foreign policy hawkishness was opposition to the Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union fell and there was no existential threat, then all of a sudden 3 kind of legs of the stool started to bicker with each other a little bit. For the left, by contrast, the Soviet Union was never the overarching threat. The overarching threat in America was always from this vast tyrannical right that was somehow going to come in and Sinclair Lewis style take over the country. And so now you see that theme was promulgated throughout the Bush years, it was promulgated throughout the Reagan years as well. And that's why the left has adapted so easily to the fall of the Soviet Union, because now the right doesn't have its enemy that it can say to the American people, we'll protect you from these folks, but the left does have its enemy, and its enemy is conservatives, and they will protect you from these evil, dastardly conservatives who want to take away your condoms and who want to remove your ability to vote, even though you had the greatest black turnout in American history in the last election cycle. These evil right-wingers, they're going to take everything from you, and that's why you have to vote for us. You see, Hillary Clinton is out there pushing voter ID. This idea that voter ID is racist. She's picking up on all the same talking points that are being used by Eric Holder and Barack Obama and members of a certain sect of the black leadership like Sharpton and Jackson. She's picking up on all these memes, and she's portraying herself as the crusader on behalf of black rights, as though conservatives don't believe in black rights. There's a reason for that. The more polarized America is as a country along racial lines, the easier it is for Democrats to win. Because the moment that we actually say, look, government has done all it can do here. Government is not in the business of trying to ensure equal outcomes. It's in the business of trying to ensure equal opportunities and equal rights. Then the left cannot win. They can't win in that situation. They have to have the ever-present threat of the evil American people who, if they were not restrained by this vast behemoth that is government, would run amok and hurt a lot of folks.
Jay is in Asheville, North Carolina. Ben Shapiro is our guest on Book TV. Jay.
Yes, Mr. Shapiro, I would like your views on why you think black leadership, especially in the media, never comments on the appalling statistic you quoted about 72% illegitimacy on unmarried mothers. It seems to me when a 16-year-old who reads at the 4th grade level has a child, what chance does a child like that have in a society like ours? I would say very little. I'd like your views. Thank you.
Well, I fully agree with that, and I think that it's a huge one of the great tragedies of modern American politics is the refusal to look the real problems of every community in the face, and the incessant attempts to paint some sort of outsider as responsible for those problems. And the way that manifests in certain segments of the black community is by believing that there is this kind of perennial white racism that is keeping black folks down. It's not white people's fault that the illegitimacy rate has moved from 30% to 72% over the course of the last 50 years. It's not white folks' fault that the economic gap has not been bridged in a better way. It's not white folks' fault that the educational gap has not been bridged in a better way. That's the fault of a lot of folks in politics, white, black, Hispanic, and every other race, who have tried to push the notion that you have to stick black kids in failing schools and keep them there. It's the fault of a lot of people who refuse to say that certain behavior is preferable to other behavior. It's the fault of a system that incentivizes bad behavior by giving you extra money if you have a kid out of wedlock as opposed to having a husband in the home. The fact is that if we want to fix the problems in the country, we have to relink the idea that there are actions and there are consequences. And what the left has done is they've separated the notion of consequences from the actions that preceded those consequences. I fully agree. The best thing that could happen for so many folks in the black community would be not only more freedom of choice in terms of the schools that they attend, but more emphasis on family values. And I mean traditional family. By the way, not unique to the black community, true of the white community also. But Charles Murray wrote a very good book called Coming Apart about how the white community has been buying into a lot of these same sort of values, including values of unwed motherhood, which is now about 40% in the white community. So it's pervading all sorts of communities. And it's a tragedy not only for the American people and our economic future and for childbearing and rearing, but it's a tragedy for those children who are growing up in a home without a mother or a father. Eric Levitt posts on our Facebook page, Shapiro keeps talking about the left and lack of facts, but all I hear is anecdotes. Well, I mean, that's a pretty broad criticism, but I would say that statistics about the unemployment rate, statistics about the unwed motherhood rate, statistics which I'm happy to cite about gun control. I try to make, I really, truly try to, I read incessantly, and what I try to do is make sure that I can argue a position as well from the left as I can from the right. And if I don't know enough about a certain issue, I also try to stay out of it, because I truly believe that the problem, one of the big problems in American politics is the continuing focus on having to have an answer for everything, even when there is no ready answer to the problem. And if you can't get through on the phone lines, you can try to make a comment on Twitter, Facebook, or by email. We'll put those addresses up as we take this call from Cameron in Portland, Oregon. Hi, Cameron.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a huge fan. Thanks for taking my call. I actually am wondering how I can get involved. I was a liberal for a long time. I went to U of O, and I've returned to my conservative values. And being in Portland, Oregon, which is probably a lot like being in California, it's all liberal Democrats here. And I've tried to get involved at PSU with the Young Republicans. They don't even have a chapter. I've tried to meet Republicans. I've tried going through the Multnomah County Republican Party to meet people, and I can't find anyone my age to help to get involved in the conservative cause. Cameron, before we have Mr. Shapiro answer, you said you returned to your roots. You were a liberal. Why were you a liberal? Well, I went to University of Oregon, and it falls very much into what Mr. Shapiro has talked about with kind of the indoctrination, and I fell a little bit into that. I lost sight of my Republican or conservative values that I was raised with and started becoming more involved in the art scene and met a lot of communists and socialists and didn't have a strong, I guess, a strong enough sense of self that I really, and didn't feel like I had ever even learned about any of those things. So when I started to learn about communism and socialism, because I was never taught that in school, it was very new to me. And I guess I needed to really learn about it and experience for myself what these liberal values kind of, I felt like it led me down the wrong path. All right, Cameron, we'll leave it there and we'll get an answer from Ben Shapiro. Well, I mean, I do think that a lot of young folks, I do say this a lot, if you're not conservative by age 18, there's a good shot you'll be liberal by age 21. And that's because when you go to a campus, there are two things that most people in campus are interested in: getting good grades and partying. And it's easier to party and get good grades if you buy into a particular mindset. It's considered cool. You also don't want to talk politics. Conservative tends to offend people, mainly because liberalism is the art of being easily offended. And so, I think that a lot of folks who go to college don't want to offend anyone. It's easier to go along to get along. And for Cameron and folks like her, if you want to get involved, you can certainly email us over at Breitbart. We try to get young people involved all the time. I'm also leading up an effort of the David Horowitz Freedom Center called Truth Revolt. That'll be launching
in a couple weeks, and that will be what I've termed an all-out assault on media bias. And we'd be happy to have your help. And you know, we love it when young people get involved. Obviously, I still consider myself a young person. I'm still on the I'm still on the sunshine side of 30. So hopefully, you know, we can get more young people involved, because I do think that it's a mistake for the Republican Party to continue targeting solely folks who are over 65. By the way, I also think it's a mistake for the Republican Party to assume that everybody age 18 will immediately vote Republican because they realize that they're never going to get their Social Security check. That is not a winning argument.
Here's an email from an 80-year-old woman, I believe. Mr. Shapiro, please talk more slowly. I'm 80, come from the totally opposite viewpoint, but love the way you think. We are more alike than our modern society would acknowledge. Have you been accused of talking fast in the past? Oh, God,
yeah. I mean, that's never stopped. That's been, but everyone in my family talks quickly. I've tried to slow it down. I've tried Valium. I mean, there's, but you know, unless there's alcohol in this cup, there's not much I can do about it. So I apologize. I'll try to slow down. I've had that criticism before.
Elaine's in Sun City, California. Hi, Elaine.
Hello. Thank you, Ben. You're a breath of fresh air. I wholeheartedly agree about Barack Obama being the first fully media-trained president. And in that light, I think he golfs and plays cards and such so that people disassociate him from his policies. And in that regard, you were speaking on Syria. I'm wondering whether this relates to Hillary Clinton and Benghazi. He is creating a story in the public that these issues are more complicated than people realize, that coming up with decisions is difficult, and therefore they couldn't have made any other choices. And that way he can paint people on the right who want a look at the facts and a factual accounting portrayed as racists who just want to bring down the first black president.
I mean, I do think there's truth to that. I think that the idea that President Obama has avoided culpability for his own foreign policy, I think that is eminently true. I think when it comes to Benghazi, there's still a lot that we don't know, including the timeline of the president's own actions that night. But there is a lot, and we also don't know what exactly was going on at that CIA annex in Benghazi. That's information that we still have to find out. I think that information is pretty clear, though, that President Obama's Middle Eastern foreign policy is a tremendous failure. Not only is it a failure, it's a failure that has enabled the Muslim Brotherhood to make tremendous inroads, as well as al-Qaeda in Syria. If there's one unifying factor in the Middle East, unfortunately, it seems to be that everybody who opposes America's interests is now in power. I mean, the Ennahda Party ended up taking over in Tunisia. The Muslim Brotherhood ended up taking over in Egypt. In Syria, both sides are bad, but al-Qaeda is associated with the rebels. In Turkey, the Islamist powers, the Islamist Party, which took over during the Bush administration, has only become more radical since President Obama took power. And the Iranian mullahs seem to be better entrenched than ever. We've also surrendered Iraq to the Islamists, and we are in the process of surrendering Afghanistan back to the Taliban. So he's pretty consistent in terms of not serving America's interests. As far as President Obama being so image conscious that he can continue to campaign as an outsider, even as he's president of the United States, it's a brilliant move. I mean, it's brilliant politically. To be the president and never to be held accountable for your own actions, but to be able to blame Congress and blame the media and blame the Tea Party and blame everybody else in the world, except for you, to be able to blame all of the people who surround you, and for the media to sort of sit there and take this. I think that we're beginning to see the first glimmers of the media being unhappy with that. Of course, it took the Obama administration directly assaulting the media by tapping the phones of James Rosen and the AP in order for the media to start caring, because the media is, again, it's an institution, and folks in the media care most when people in the media are being attacked. I think that the American people are starting to wake up to this. What I do fear is the cult of personality that's been built up around President Obama, and that was a purposeful attempt by him to build up that cult of personality. The 2012 Democratic National Convention was one of the sickest political events that I have ever seen. When I say sick, I mean in the sense of it was almost like a political illness. People can support President Obama, that's fair. People can support his platform, that's fair. But the person worship was frankly quite frightening. The replacement, the Democratic donkey was nowhere to be seen. It was the Obama symbol that suddenly appeared everywhere. It was Obama's face that was gracing all the T-shirts. There was a great sand statue of President Obama. The personal following that President Obama has developed means that 40% of the population, 35% of the population will back him no matter what he does. I mean, when Jimmy Kimmel does these routines where he goes out and asks the average Obama voter on the street whether they support all of Mitt Romney's positions, and they say yes when they think they're Obama's positions, that demonstrates just how little folks think about this stuff, and that is a serious problem for the continuation of American democracy. When we back people instead of policies, I understand that I've written about the attraction of people, but it is our obligation as voters to get more and more informed about this, especially given the dangers that we face in the world.
Ben Shapiro, are there closeted conservatives working behind the scenes in Hollywood?
Yeah, absolutely. I know hundreds of them. There absolutely are. And they are discriminated against when they come out. It is much harder to be a conservative in Hollywood than to be a gay person in Hollywood. It's not even close. There's still some latent racism in Hollywood, but there's not a lot of homophobia in Hollywood, and there is tremendous anti-conservative sentiment. Anti-religious sentiment is also quite prevalent in Hollywood. It was interesting. I remember when I wrote Primetime Propaganda, one of the folks that I talked to was Patricia Heaton, and Patty, who is cited as an unnamed source in the book, Patty was talking to me, and I said to her, have you ever been discriminated against in Hollywood? Patty, for those who don't know, is the star of Everybody Loves Raymond. Now she's on The Middle on ABC. Very talented actress. And I said to her, have you ever been discriminated against? Now, she's been working consistently for about 15 years. And she said, no, I've never really felt that. And I said, okay, that's great. I'll write that.
Is she a conservative?
She's a conservative, yeah. She's especially on social issues. She's very, very pro-life. And in fact, people have attacked her for, Mark Harris of Entertainment Weekly attacked her specifically for being pro-life and suggesting that her conservatism had infused the middle and was somehow perverting the show. So it was quite interesting. But Patty said to me she didn't feel that she'd been discriminated against. She then called me back a little while later and she said, I called around town to ask if anybody had heard anything, and it turned out that I've lost several specific jobs because I'm pro-life and openly conservative in certain areas. And she called me back a few days later and she said, would you please cite me as an unnamed source because I would like not to feel the sting of that discrimination again. She ended up coming out later and talking about it, but I did to protect her. I cited her as an unnamed actor in the book. So yes, even the big name actors in Hollywood are discriminated against, although it is easier to be, once you're out, once you're big enough, if you're Clint Eastwood, you're not going to lose work. Right? If you're the low-level grip, you're going to lose work. Because low-level grips are easier to come by than Clint Eastwood.
Does your political advocacy hurt your parents in the entertainment world?
Not so far, but my mom is very, very apolitical at work. And my dad is, I can't say that it's hurt him too much. Thank God, I've largely tried to keep my family separated from my own career. I mean, I get death threats on a fairly regular basis that necessitate, getting security systems and such. So I try to protect my family's privacy as much as I possibly can. Politics is a rough business, and I sort of accept the risk that comes with that. But that's why I don't talk about what my sisters do or who they are.
Why do you get death threats?
Well, I've gotten death threats in the past simply because of my political positions. I mean, there was I remember after the Piers Morgan interview, for example, which went viral, and that was the one where I suggested that he'd stood on the graves of the kids of Sandy Hook to push his political agenda. There was a couple folks who tweeted out my home address, people don't like it when you're particularly outspoken. I mean, there's nothing more vile to me in any setting than threats of violence based on somebody's politics. I mean, it's just disgusting. But it goes with the territory, and you just accept the risk and put a shotgun under your bed.
Angelique from Chicago, email. The left doesn't appear to be bullies. In my opinion, they are looked at as the helpful party. So, question, how can the right change their perception and likability when many of the policies they seem to want to regulate or change are deemed to be helpful to the masses, i.e. food stamps, Section 8?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that's the language there is really telling, because the Democratic Party as the helpful party means that by default, what does the Republican Party become? The anti-helpful party, right? They're the party that not only doesn't help people, they're the party that hurts people. And that's a very dangerous position for any party to be in. The Republican Party needs to start making the case on a regular basis that not only are Democratic policies not helpful, they're incredibly harmful. And in many cases, they're not even well-intentioned. Because what the Republican Party for a long time has done is said, oh, well, you guys have good intentions, you're just wrong. The Democratic Party never makes that case. They just make the case that you're evil and you hate poor people and you hate black people and you hate gay people, and that's why you believe all of these crazy things. If you didn't hate all those people, then you would believe what we believe. It's time for the Republican Party and for conservatives in general to start recognizing that folks on the left don't necessarily have good intentions. If you're one of these folks who's in Los Angeles right now and you are upholding the inability of black kids in the LAUSD system, which I went to school in LAUSD, if you're upholding the inability of black kids to move schools, to get a voucher, to get out of that situation, if you're Eric Holder's Department of Justice and you are suing the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans because you think that 500 black kids getting vouchers somehow destroys the racial composition of a 40,000 student school district in New Orleans, not only are you not helpful, there's a nasty and malicious element to that. At a certain point, what I've said many times is that ignorance becomes sin. You can claim that your policies don't work and that you've just made a mistake, but after 40, 50 years of this, when communities remain devastated, at a certain point you have to start wondering about the intentions. Is it willful blindness or is it actual maliciousness? In either case, Republicans need to start arguing on character, and they need to stop running away. Whenever I hear Republicans after the 2012, we need to recast ourselves. There is no way to recast yourself. You can't. You are what other people say about you. And the same is true for Democrats. So if the Democrats are what Republicans say about them, then they are well-intentioned people who aren't very good at their jobs. If Republicans are what Democrats say about them, then they are a bunch of warmongering thugs who want to kill people and harm children. So the normal American voter who's more concerned about Miley Cyrus twerking on stage at the Video Music Awards than about the latest provision of Obamacare regulation is going to go with just the general feel. And the general feel is how most people vote. They vote based on how do I feel about this guy? What do I think about this guy? It's a spur-of-the-moment decision. And then sometimes there's a post-facto justification and sometimes not.
Should Miley Cyrus be allowed to twerk on stage at VMA and that be broadcast on television?
Well, I think that, I think that it's time for conservatives to use their market strength against the VMA. I have never been a huge fan of government involvement in regulation or censorship. In Porn Generation, I talked a little bit about the power of local communities to censor. I think that's different than federal censorship. When it comes to TV, I think that the most obvious target should be the advertisers. The left has done this on a routine basis. They went after Glenn Beck this way. They went after Rush Limbaugh this way. They went after Sean Hannity this way. They've gone after Lou Dobbs. They've gone after multiple people on the right by going after their advertising base. This is one of the things that we're going to be doing at Truth Revolt, which is this new organization I'm working with David Horowitz, which is we're going to be looking at instances like the VMA, and we're going to be looking at the companies that target viewers there. And we're going to be saying to them, you don't understand. There's an actual counter effect to you putting up the cash so Miley Cyrus can shake her booty on national television like that and bump and grind with Robin Thicke. There's an actual effect of that, and there's going to be an effect on you in terms of your stores. This is actually what happened in Hollywood between 1930 and 1960. The Hays Code was a voluntarily imposed code by Hollywood. It wasn't government mandated. Everybody always said, oh, it's McCarthy. It wasn't McCarthy. It was voluntarily imposed by Hollywood because of the Catholic Legion of Decency was boycotting Hollywood in massive numbers. And Hollywood decided that they understood where their bread was buttered. It's about time for conservatives to use their market power as opposed to sort of ignoring the power of culture to drive views, drive feelings, and drive opinions.
Ben Shapiro, in Primetime Propaganda, you write about the MPAA, the Motion Picture
Association of America.
Right, but you also say that the people who rate the programs, they don't tell us who those people are. We have no idea who is on that board.
Right. When people rate movies, when they say PG-13 or R, we don't know who's actually making that call. And when you see the Y7 on the screen, they used to have it. I think they still have it. Where it says like the age that's appropriate. That's made by some arbitrary group. We have no clue who those folks are. So a lot of parents, that was more as an awareness point. But parents should be aware that the rating system is only as good as the rating body that provides that system. Moody's is better than the local dog catcher down the street rating your stocks and your bonds. So it's worthwhile recognizing that trusting Hollywood to police itself is probably not the best way to go about doing things. The left has understood this for a long time. The left has created a market structure that causes Hollywood to censor itself on a pretty regular basis. One of the most important groups in Hollywood right now is the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. They actually pre-screen shows in Hollywood with GLAAD because they don't want GLAAD initiating boycotts against either a network or its sponsors. This is something that the right needs to pick up on. The use of market power is a tremendously impressive tool. And the right, which is a market-based solution, instead is looking to government in many cases, which seems to me completely counterproductive.
Jim in Laurel, Maryland, you've been very patient. You're on Book TV on C-SPAN 2 with Ben Shapiro.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. Appreciate it. The thing I'd wish you'd address is the hypocrisy that I see with types like Obama, for instance, the admitted drug use and so on, and yet they're still maintaining policies that are locking people up. I see this from all a lot of the higher-ups. I think Clinton was involved in a lot of this stuff. He, at least in the book No One Left to Lie To, he was, can't think of the guy's name, but said he was basically a rapist and so on. That's what it seems to me is these higher-ups get away with crimes that if a normal person did would be locked right up, and yet they're not held accountable. It goes all the way back through Vietnam and everything else. And Johnson was never held accountable for the Gulf of Tonkin incident, both he and McNamara. And the other thing I wanted to know, have you ever heard of a book called Reading Obama by James Klopperman, I think, but is a Harvard prof, and this is a very positive spin. I haven't read it, but that's the reviews claim that.
All right, Jim, thanks for calling in. Mr. Shapiro?
Yeah, I don't know that book. As far as the other question about various politicians getting away with crimes that they themselves condemn, I'm never a big fan of the hypocrisy argument, just as a general matter. Whenever people say so-and-so's a hypocrite, the question to me is not whether they're hypocrisy is not what people think it is. Hypocrisy is it's okay for me to do it, but it's not okay for you to do it. So, you know, if President Obama were, for example, taking cocaine right now and then locking people up for crack cocaine, then he'd be a hypocrite. The fact that he was doing coke back when he was in high school is of no relevance to his policy on cocaine use, the same way that if somebody was screwing around during Woodstock in 1969, that's of no relevance to their perspective on teenage sex now. You can actually and you can actually even maintain the belief that what you're doing is wrong and sinful at the same time that you're doing it. So that's not. I don't like the hypocrisy argument in general. As far as the idea that there are a lot of politicians who get away with a lot of things that normal folks don't, that is absolutely true. The Obama administration if the Obama administration existed in the corporate world, they would have been prosecuted under RICO multiple times already for all of the scandals that they've been involved in. And the Obama administration has somehow gotten out from under that. It's not unique to the Obama administration by any means. There are a lot of presidents who have done that. Obama has taken that to a new level. So as far as the criminality of the Obama administration, certainly Benghazi, Fast and Furious, the NSA scandal, all of these things speak to the level of executive power pushed by the Obama administration, and then they slough it off on low-level employees who just never magically exist as soon as anybody finds out about it. This is the Obama administration, in my opinion, runs very much like a mafia organization. The boss doesn't have to know what all the low-level soldiers are doing. All he has to do is ask somebody to rid him of this meddlesome priest, and somehow the meddlesome priest is gone. And Dan is in Bridgewater, New Jersey. Hi, Dan.
Hi. You know, I was raised under communism and then came here. Invariably, I joined Young Americans for Freedom, became an officer in there, and was in the 60s at Berkeley during the student uprising there. And the left, I'm very familiar with the left, and because of my political activities, I'm very familiar with the right. And I have to point out to you that your problem is the same as that of the left. You speak the same way by inventing the other person, by attributing motives and interests and ideas and everything to the other person to suit yourself. For example, the president of the Anti-Defamation League was saying that Christians are anti-Semitic because they are jealous of the Jews being God's chosen people. Now, he could just say that. That could be his opinion, but he publishes that in the name of an organization he calls the Anti-Defamation League. And in the same way, much as you guys are pushing these images of the other side, exactly the way the communists used to do. I mean, under Stalinism, it was exactly the same. That's why there's no more meaningful dialogue. At Berkeley, we had a meaningful dialogue between the left and the right in the 1960s, and it only deteriorated because students became attracted to other things. But you're not advancing a culture an America of understanding complexity, of understanding the in-depth matters. If you were a physician right now, you would be a criminal. But if you really understood the depth and the need for dialogue between all sides, you wouldn't be speaking like a leftist, which is exactly what you're doing.
I think we got the point. Let's get an answer from author Ben Shapiro.
Well, as far as the idea that Berkeley was a wellspring of democratic debate back in the 1960s, I would say the hell you did. I mean, the idea that there was a tremendous debate between left and right in Berkeley in the 1960s is nonsense. It was taken over by the left in its entirety to the point that Governor Reagan had to send tanks in. They took over student buildings. They used what would essentially be quote-unquote terrorist methods in order to take over government buildings, and then they were expelled by force. The idea that this was some sort of democratic uprising, I mean, the left likes to portray the 1960s as sort of a wellspring of democracy. The truth is, it was a wellspring of criminalism, and it completely perverted the American political system in a lot of very negative ways. The idea that people have been calling each other names and been going after each other since time immemorial is certainly the case. I mean, that's true. Jefferson and Adams were going at each other tooth and nail all the way back in the election of 1800. So it's nothing new to suggest that character attacks are going on in America. I would say that they've been largely relegated to one side, and I'm not one of these folks who believes that if someone starts a fist fight and somebody else punches back, those two punches are equivalent. And I will say that responding fire with fire is not the same as starting the fire in the first place. As somebody had asked earlier about Rush Limbaugh, Ann Coulter, Bill O'Reilly, me. My answer is that I didn't start this fight. But one of the things that my father always said is never start a fight, but if somebody else starts a fight, you finish it.
Ben Shapiro is the author of 5 books. Brainwashed was his first, How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth. Porn Generation came out the next year in 2005, How Social Liberalism is Corrupting Our Future. Project President, Bad Hair and Botox, On the Road to the White House, 2008. Primetime Propaganda, The True Hollywood Story of How the Left Took Over Your TV, in 2011. His most recent book came out this year, Bullies, How the Left's Culture of Fear and Intimidation Silences Americans. Here's a quick look at some of the books that Ben Shapiro is currently reading and some of his favorite books. And we are back live with author Ben Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro, who is Debbie Genetti?
Oh, Debbie Giannetti was my 4th grade teacher, and she was really an inspiring teacher. I skipped 3rd grade. I skipped 2 grades along the way. I skipped 3rd, I skipped 9th, and when she was the 4th grade teacher whose class I skipped into, and she really gave me maybe the best single piece of advice that I've ever received, which was she turned to me one day and she said, "Don't let potential be written on your tombstone," meaning we know you're smart, we know you're talented, we know you can do a lot of things. But it's hard work, it's drive, it's determination, it's turning that potential into something relevant that actually matters. So don't be the prodigy. Be somebody who actually does something beyond just being smart at 9 or 10 or 15 or 18. And to me, that was something that mattered deeply because I was, as the youngest syndicated columnist at 17, I never tried to make a big deal out of that, really, because I always knew, the nice thing, the nice and the not nice thing about being 17 is that you will not be 17 for very long. So that's so at a certain point I would grow out of being the young prodigy, and at a certain point my work would have to stand on its own merits as opposed to the curiosity level of like the old George Bernard Shaw line, right? It's seeing a 17-year-old write is the shock as opposed to are the ideas actually any good?
Public or private schools growing up?
Back and forth. So I was in public school for elementary from K through 4. I was in
LA?
School. Yeah, in LA. I was at Edison Elementary from K through 4, skipping 3. Then I was at a Jewish private school 5 and 6. I was back at public school 7, 8 at Walter Reed Junior High. I was in the magnet program over there.
And that's also in LA?
That's also in LA.
Okay.
And then I skipped 9th grade of high school, and then 10th, 11th, 12th were at a private Jewish day school called ULA, Yeshiva University of Los Angeles. And then UCLA is, a college, but it's a public school, obviously.
And how old were you when you started at UCLA?
I was 16.
What was that like, being that young?
It was fun. I mean, age never really bothered me too much. Most of my friends now are 50. I mean, honestly, I get along very well with folks of all ages, and it's only now that I'm, about to hit 30 that I actually have friends who are in my own age group. So I spend most of my life friendly with people who are significantly older.
And Harvard Law School right out of UCLA?
Yeah, I went straight from one to the other. And that was great. I loved Harvard Law.
So you graduated from Harvard Law?
I was 23 when I graduated. That was back in 07.
And is writing books your main money-making occupation?
Well, it's one of them. I actually have several. So I get up at 5:30 every morning and do the morning radio show in Los Angeles on KRLA 870. It's called The Morning Answer. I'm one of 3. There's actually a liberal guy on there who I'm close friends with and a conservative gal, and I'm kind of the guy who holds down the intellectual fort because it's a conservative station. So it's called The Morning Answer with Brian, Ben, and Alicia. I'm the Ben, so I do that 6 to 9 in the morning. I finish my shift there. I drive home, and I'm editor-at-large for Breitbart.com, Breitbart News, and so I do that for most of the rest of the day. I also am just starting up Truth Revolt, which I've mentioned a couple times, so truthrevolt.com will come online probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And when that happens, then I'll be splitting time between Breitbart and Truth Revolt. Both kind of feed each other. And both companies are semi-working together in friendship. And then at night I write books and ghostwrite books and take my wife out to dinner. So.
You told us some news about your wife as well.
Oh, yeah, she's pregnant. So that's very exciting. We're very pumped up. She's due January 24th. So I'm actually struggling right now to get through my 6th book, which should come out early January. The sign date was August 1 and the due date's October 1. So that's moving real fast. But I want to try and get it out before the baby's born, because once the baby's born, all bets are off. I'm going to be home. I'm going to be with my wife. I'm going to be with my baby. And I know that my life is going to change dramatically. So now is the time to work 17 hours a day because, when the baby's born, I'm predicting that I will be dealing with the baby 17 hours a day. So.
What's your next book about? What's the title? Can you tell us?
The title is yet to be decided. The tentative title is Abuse of Power. It's about the Obama administration, and it is essentially the thesis that I laid out earlier, which is that the Obama administration is in many ways a criminal enterprise, and it's responsible for criminal violations ranging from incitement to riot to what would probably be termed involuntary manslaughter if you're looking at Fast and Furious. Or certainly espionage under Benghazi, if you believe, as I do, that what that was a gun-running routine, as Rand Paul has suggested, that the United States was running guns through the Benghazi consulate, the CIA annex in Benghazi, to Syria. On September 11th, the consulate in Benghazi was attacked. On September 14th, the single largest shipment of arms bound for Syria landed from Libya in Turkey, which was the go-between. There are many theories as to why exactly it was attacked, but there's pretty solid evidence that the guns that were there were being sought by the terrorists who attacked the Benghazi consulate. And then as far as the cover-up afterward, that's typical Obama administration not wanting to let the cat out of the bag. We're in the middle of an election cycle. We don't want to look as though we're weak. We don't want to look as though Al-Qaeda is still a functioning force. And we really don't want anybody to look at our general Middle Eastern policy, which has emboldened Islamist groups all over the area.
Who's your publisher for your newest book? You've worked with several publishers on
Yeah, this one is the same as the last one. It's Threshold Editions. It's Simon & Schuster. They're wonderful. I'm very glad to be working with them again. In the past, I started off with Thomas Nelson, did Regnery, back to Thomas Nelson, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and this new one is Simon & Schuster.
Do you do all your writing at home, computer?
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, I do research that requires me to go out of the house. For Primetime Propaganda, I did a lot of on-site interviews with folks. But most of I'm very happy to work from the home. And this is the wave of the future, gang. Don't buy commercial real estate. Everybody's going to be working from home, and it's going to be fabulous. You're going to be able to spend time with your family. You're not going to have to sit in an office and wait for the next irrelevant meeting. It's the best thing ever.
Did you get pushback on Primetime Propaganda?
Not too much from the Hollywood
some of your
community.
Sources, even.
No, not too much. They were kind of pissed that I didn't tell them I was conservative up front. But I felt no obligation to do that because the question is the same regardless of who is asking it. So your answer should theoretically be the same regardless of who's asking it. I try not to vary my answers. They're typically as articulated in the way that I want them to be, whether that's strident or not as strident, regardless of who is asking the question. I didn't think that was a particularly relevant criticism from folks. Nobody could claim it. I'm very meticulous about taping all of the interviews that I do and getting permission for that. I'm a lawyer. I understand two-party consent. So, in fact, when I'm interviewed, I actually insist that the interviews are taped because I don't want to be misquoted. And tape is the best friend of anybody who wants to be quoted correctly or who wants to quote correctly.
Mr. Shapiro, what was Harvard Law School like for you?
Oh, it was wonderful. I loved Harvard Law. I really had a good time there. In fact, a publisher wanted me to write like a bashing Harvard Law book, and I told them no because I really, not only did I enjoy Harvard Law, I felt that there was, for the most part, tremendous openness to diverse points of view, even though the faculty was very much to the left. In fact, one of the people who wrote me a recommendation for my first gig, where I worked at a law firm for a year before I quit because I hated it, was Lani Guinier, right? The Secretary of, I think the Secretary of Labor, attempted nominee by Bill Clinton, who was so far to the left that she was tossed out by a Democratic Senate. So Lani and I got along really well. She was very open to other opinions, and she's a really nice gal. I was very close to the professor there named Richard Parker, who was a leftist populist, kind of new left 1960s. I love talking with folks on the left. I couldn't live in LA or Cambridge otherwise. It's fun for me. It's enjoyable. And usually you can have a good conversation with folks. So I can't speak highly enough of my time at Harvard Law. I even had a few run-ins with future Justice Kagan. And the first time I talked with Justice Kagan, then Dean Kagan, she's a good dean. She built an ice rink. She built like an ice skating rink outside. But I remember the first time I talked with Dean Kagan, we were sitting at an introductory dinner. We were sitting in one of these typical kind of Hogswardian rooms at Harvard Law School. You know, everything looks like it's mahogany and it's all these balustrades. It's ridiculous looking. And I remember she sat down at the table, and I said, and she said, "Isn't this a beautiful room?" And I said, "It kind of looks like the Haunted Mansion before it was haunted." And she gave me a look like I'd killed a kitten. And then we sort of moved on. But we had there were a couple kind of minor run-ins with Dean, soon to be Justice Kagan, when she tried to fight against the Solomon Amendment. She tried to throw ROTC off campus, basically. So I made that public, and we got in a slight spat there, but good dean, bad justice.
Michael posts on our Facebook page, please ask Mr. Shapiro about the status of Shirley Sherrod's lawsuit against his so-called news site, Breitbart.com.
You know, I don't want to comment on that for legal reasons. I know that the lawsuit, I believe, is still ongoing, but I'm not personally involved. I wasn't involved with the company at that time. I'm happy to talk about Shirley Sherrod in terms of my own opinion on what happened because I knew Andrew at the time. But in terms of the legal status and what's going on with that, I'm going to leave that to the president and CEO of the company and to the folks at Breitbart who were involved at the time.
What is your personal opinion?
On the Shirley Sherrod controversy? Right. I mean, the facts are relatively clear, which is that Andrew posted what was a bit of a longer video. His original column exculpated Shirley Sherrod. It talked about how she had redeemed herself in that story. And the point of Andrew's original story was that he was going after the NAACP. He was going after folks for cheering in the crowd when Shirley Sherrod was talking about how she had once discriminated against white farmers. I remember when Andrew did this, he was focused almost completely on the slurs of racism against the Tea Party. And so one of the ways he was coming back on that was to say, well, the NAACP, which is claiming Tea Party racism, has a lot of members who are racist. That's in fact what most of that piece was about. So that's sort of my opinion on what happened with Shirley Sherrod.
Back to your calls. Carl in Ridgefield, New Jersey. You're on with Ben Shapiro. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Ben. You mentioned Limbaugh and you mentioned O'Reilly.
Mm-hmm.
There's also on the conservative talk show host, you also have Hannity and also Michael Savage. With the exception of Rush Limbaugh, all the others will, when they invite callers, you know, they interrupt these people who have even good remarks, and you can't even get the point of the callers. You can invite people on and let them talk. Rush Limbaugh is very polite. But let me get to O'Reilly. About a month ago, somebody wrote in an email, which he published and was not on his side. Apparently he had no answer, and he does not like to be bested. So he comes out with this crude remark, you need help. To me, that was the ultimate in pomposity. And after that, I shut him off and will not listen to O'Reilly. I don't know what you think. But, oh, by the way, just for the record, and I'll cut right off, my last name is Shapiro, and I happen to be the author of 3 novels in print. That's it. We won't go into those details. It's your show, not mine. Well, that's my complaint. Really, O'Reilly, he's too much. He just doesn't like to be bested. Okay, that's about it.
Thank you, Carl. Mr. Shapiro, any response for Carl?
I mean, no particular response other than, you know, the entertainment business is also the entertainment business. As far as that particular call, I didn't happen to hear that one, and how particular hosts deal with callers it definitely differs by host. So, yeah, I don't want to comment on any one specific host, especially when I don't know the particular circumstance that's being discussed. I know that when I talk with folks, especially we take calls on our show in Los Angeles, when I have the ability to, I enjoy engaging in the conversation as much as possible. It's no fun if nobody gets to say anything.
This is a tweet from John Armstrong. What kind of stories can a conservative film producer tell to respond to the Hollywood juggernaut without being preachy?
Good stories. I've always said that what the left does, and they're very smart about this, is they just let their worldview kind of come out in the stories they tell, as opposed to trying to force it. In fact, the worst stuff the left does is when they're making Green Zone or Promised Land, basically anything involving Matt Damon that's not a Bourne movie. Anytime they get very preachy and angry, and it turns into a diatribe about politics in America, that's their worst stuff. The stuff that's most effective for the left is when they're actually just trying to tell a story that happens to involve a bunch of leftist values. Avatar, right? For the right, the stuff that's the most effective is telling a great story that just happens to be conservative, or if you're not watching for it, you're not even going to notice it, but it's there, right? Dark Knight Rises, fabulous example of this. Dark Knight Rises was probably not even meant to be a conservative movie. The entire movie is a diatribe about Marxism and the French Revolution. I mean, there's including a full trial scene, a mock trial scene. It's fantastic, right? I mean, there were folks who said that The Dark Knight was a conservative movie. And one of my favorite movies is The Lives of Others, which is certainly not meant to be a particularly conservative movie, but talks about the dangers of an overarching government monitoring your every activity. It's a German movie based on the East German Stasi. It's a wonderful film. So the key is to tell a good story and make the politics secondary, as opposed to start off with, I'm going to get this point across, and here's a story that I'm going to build around this particular point. Even when the left does that, they're not very good at it. It's why, for example, when you watch All in the Family on TV, which is a show that was written like that, it was written as an issue show. Norman Lear talked about this. It was written as a show. We're going to do abortion this week. We're going to do race relations this week. It doesn't hold up. You watch it now, it's just not funny. You watch the Dick Van Dyke Show, right, and it's actually still funny because it wasn't trying to be political. And even if you watch Family Ties is better at this than All in the Family is. So there are a lot of shows that do it well, but the key is tell a good story first, entertain people first, and just allow the politics to flow into it in a natural fashion, as opposed to trying to ram it through. The problem with conservatives, they're like dolphins, and when it comes to entertainment. I mean, they have two halves of their brain, right? There's the half that's political, and then there's the half that's entertainment. And just like a dolphin that only sleeps with one half of its brain on, it's like that. When the entertainment side of their brain is on, then they will go home and watch the same stuff everybody else will watch. Big Bang Theory and all these other shows. When you go to a lecture and you're talking to conservatives and you say, what shows do you watch? And the entertainment side is off and the political side is on. They don't watch anything but Bible stories and Ronald Reagan biopics. And it's just not realistic. And what it leads to is this bizarre situation where we're not producing any content that anybody outside the community of conservatives actually wants to watch. Right? For as much as we may love a Ronald Reagan biopic, that's not how you're going to reach a 21-year-old. You're going to have to reach a 21-year-old in another way. Dark Knight Rises hit way more people than, and at a root level, about the evils of communism than any movie ever produced about Ronald Reagan.
This email, this is from David. So the liberals have taken over the vast majority of the universities. How did that happen? How did American conservatives allow themselves to be overwhelmed, surrendering so much ground to the left? What are they, helpless?
Well, I do think that they're incompetent. I don't think that the right has been helpless. I think that they're mostly incompetent. When it comes to the university system, the move toward the left really started in the 1930s when there was tremendous socialist pressure within the university system. The universities interacted. FDR drew from his administration heavily from the university system. Leftism in America, the progressive movement, which started early 20th century and was an import from Germany, there's a reason Woodrow Wilson was a professor. Leftism in the university system started off very early. It didn't start off in the 60s, it got worse. It didn't start off in the 30s, it got worse then. It really started off all the way back during the progressive era, the Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson era. So you have to go back a long ways to when conservatives really kind of gave it up. And at that point, progressivism was under the banner of populism, so it wasn't quite the same divide that it is now. As far as why they haven't taken it back, the answer is because folks on the right typically don't see politics as a business. And this is why when you look at folks on the left, if you just looked objectively at the folks on the Democratic platform in the 2008 campaign when it was an open primary, you were looking at the best and the brightest. I mean, leave aside Al Sharpton, you were looking at the best and the brightest. You were looking at a group of folks, highly educated, highly intelligent. Barack Obama is a very smart guy. Hillary Clinton is a very smart woman. Joe Biden, for all the talk about him being an idiot, is not an idiot by any stretch of the imagination. There are a lot of folks on that dais who are very, very bright. You go over to the right side of the aisle, and you're looking at a bunch of folks who are at best everybody's second pick. Nobody there is what you would call, brilliant, somebody who you couldn't wait to vote for, somebody who was going to spend their entire life in politics. In fact, even Mitt Romney, right, did not spend his entire life in politics. He was a businessman first. Most conservatives, the difference between liberals and conservatives can be summed up in a thought experiment. Most conservatives, if they could just be left alone by the government and by everybody else, would be happy to do that. In fact, if there were just a conservative country, if they said, we're going to do our thing and you do your thing, right, leave aside the pro-life issue, which is the one exception, but we'll do our thing, you do your thing, we're happy, you leave us alone, you don't tax us, you don't come after us, you don't try to regulate us, we're not going to care. Conservatives would be happy with that. Liberals would immediately try to tax the conservatives because for liberals, government is the business. Government is what is right. The growth of government is in and of itself an inherent good because rights don't spring from God in the liberal worldview. Rights spring from the government. The government gives you rights. Your rights come from a vast government that has decided what you are allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. It's this very Hobbesian view of what constitutes rights, as opposed to the John Locke view of there are natural rights that the government is instituted to protect. Hobbes' view was that government gives you rights because if the government weren't there, then you'd be murdering each other. So the left believes that. The left has a very almost self-contradictory view of human nature. On the one hand, if the government weren't there, we'd all be a bunch of racists murdering each other in the streets. On the other hand, if government is there, then humanity is eminently perfectible, and we can all be turned into perfect copies of one another, perfect human beings. The right has a clearer view of human nature because it's a biblically founded view of human nature, which is that human beings have the capacity for good and they have the capacity for evil. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're evil. This is what the founders talked about. When in the Federalist Papers it talked about when Madison talked about if men were good, no government would be necessary, and if men were evil, no government could stop people from doing what they want to do anyway. That's a crystal clear view of human nature. Unfortunately, what's been lost in America is that view of human nature. People have been termed by the left either completely bad or completely good, and really unable to shape their nature. It's almost a biologically determinist view of human nature. It's the same thing that undergirds the entire framework surrounding treating sexual orientation the same way as race, right? Treating sexual behavior the same way as race. That if you are engaged in gay activity, that's the same thing as being black, which it absolutely is not. One is an activity and one is being black. And in a democracy, nobody cares about what's in your head, so orientation is really not what we're talking about. When anybody talks about gay marriage, they're talking about behavior. They're not talking about what's in your mind. Lots of people want lots of things in their mind. All of us have thought about killing someone in our mind. That's not a crime. So it's the difference between left and right comes down to basically that fundamental feeling about what constitutes the human and whether the human is capable of perfection by other humans who have been given this tremendous power by even more humans.
Next call for Ben Shapiro. Sarah, Rutland, Vermont. Hello.
Hi, Ben. It's so good to hear you speak. You have an absolutely brilliant mind. I'm praying that you will be our first Jewish president. I have two quick questions for you. One is, do you think there is any possibility that Obama will ever be impeached? And number two, who do you see as being successful or your choice as a Republican candidate in the next election for president?
As far as Obama being impeached, he's not going to be impeached. Republicans should stop seeing President Obama as the root of all evil. President Obama is the culmination of a 100-year growth of a massive government and a progressive movement that has slowly taken over the country. The first thing conservatives have to do if they want to win again is acknowledge that they lost. Conservatives keep pretending that they won. They didn't. We lost. We don't live in a fully capitalistic system. We live in a corporate system, a corporatist system. We don't live in a country that is fully socially conservative. We live in a country that is quickly moving to the left on social issues. Understanding that, we understand the uphill battle that we have to fight. And really centering on President Obama as he's the bad guy. Imagine, just for a second, that Obama were impeached, as so many conservatives seem to want. Imagine that he were gone. Joe Biden takes over. How is Joe Biden materially different from Barack Obama in any way other than he's even less competent than the current president? Joe Biden has exactly the same policy prescriptions, and so does Hillary Clinton. So I think that this is a broader movement that has to be fought. As far as 2016 race on the Republican side, there are a lot of interesting candidates. You know, Ted Cruz is an interesting guy. Rand Paul is a very interesting guy, although I disagree with him strenuously on a lot of his foreign policy. Alan West is a very interesting guy. He's somebody who, if image matters, Alan West is somebody who really cuts an interesting figure for the Republican Party. There's some other folks. Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, I'm a big fan of. He's kind of laid low so far, but I'm hoping he'll throw his hat into the ring. One thing is certain, though, for the Republican Party. In order for the Republican Party to ever win again, they need to overcome a couple of things. One is a tremendous technological disadvantage that they demonstrated in 2012. And the second is that we have to nominate somebody who is willing to draw a stark contrast in bold colors between the conservative movement and the liberal movement. We are not going to win. Republicans are not going to win by claiming that they can run government better than the left. The right should view government like the ring from Lord of the Rings. Okay, no one can wield this thing. This government has to be taken down a peg. It has to be shortened. It has to be curbed. You don't have to throw the thing into the fire, but it has to be controlled. And the idea that government is just a tool that can be wielded by anybody equally, and that Republicans are just better at managing things. Well, maybe we're better at managing American decline than the left, but you're still managing a decline so long as government continues to grow at this rate.
Ben Shapiro, why are you currently reading Richard Florida's The Rise of the Creative Class?
Well, it looked interesting. It looked optimistic. I haven't spent enough time actually reading it yet to tell you whether I agree with it, but the idea of entrepreneurs creating, I think this is it fits in with what George Gilder's new book, Knowledge and Power, has been about, the idea that we have to incentivize folks to move out of what have traditionally been seen as, you know, the job-creating industries, the manufacturing and what now is, I guess, the only job-creating industry, the fast food industry, and move into the production of ideas, move into the production of creative notions, because that's really what changes the world. The true heroes in America are, look, I don't think that it's heroic to go out and get a job to support your family. I think that's what's normal. I do think it's heroic to risk everything that you have in order to bring a new product to market that's going to make millions of lives better. In a certain moral calculus, Bill Gates is much more valuable to humanity than Mother Teresa. Not to say Mother Teresa wasn't a wonderful human being. She was. But Bill Gates is responsible for the hiring of millions of people, the wealth of millions of people, and changing the lives of millions of people. Entrepreneurship has largely been abandoned as a societal good. And the view of entrepreneurship, which is that it betters everybody. And capitalism is the great altruistic experiment in human history. This is where the right really goes wrong. When they talk about Schumpeter's creative destruction, that's a term that does not resonate with folks, because the truth is that capitalism is not about destruction. There may be things that get destroyed along the side, but that's not what capitalism is. Capitalism is the greatest altruistic experiment on behalf of tolerance and diversity in human history. There's a reason that the reason Branch Rickey signed Jackie Robinson is because he thought he could make money off of him. And when it comes to bringing new products to market, this is another distinction between left and right. The left would like for everybody to have a 1998 Nokia cell phone. The right would like for everybody, at a certain point, to have an iPhone 12. We're not going to get to the iPhone 12 if we keep removing the money from the folks who actually put up the money to create the iPhone 12 and all the people who compete with those people. The beautiful thing about capitalism as opposed to socialism, it is inherently altruistic. Capitalism is about the notion that if I don't give you something that you want, I will starve. Socialism is about the idea that if you don't give me something that I want, I will starve you. It's inherently selfish. So the idea that socialism is somehow some sort of great moral good is just a lie. Capitalism is the great moral good because it demands of you, of the individual. It's always easier to point the finger. Everybody else is responsible for making that guy's life better. But capitalism forces you at the point of starvation to go out and create for you and your family and to make something better, not just for you and your family, but for the other person who you're dealing with. Voluntarism and the belief in opting in is the root, and freedom. I mean, this is true freedom, is capitalism. True tyranny is the socialistic state that we seem to be moving closer and closer to each and every day.
Dr. Bob Garfield, email. Could you comment on what you studied at UCLA and what was your major? Why did you choose law school?
Well, I studied political science. I started off as a philosophy major, decided that that wasn't practical enough, and then went to an even less practical major, political science. I was a political science major for 3 out of the 4 years that I was at UCLA. The reason was because the classes were easy and it wasn't math. And then after I finished political science and I decided that I was going to go to law school, the reason is because, really, my mom works in business affairs, and she'd always thought about going to law school, and she hadn't. So she suggested that I go and I take the LSAT. I went ahead, I took it, I did really well, I applied, I got into Harvard Law. You get into Harvard Law, you don't say no. I remember the day before I went, though, I really didn't want to go. The day before I went, I was saying I'd never want to be a lawyer. There's no way I'm going to practice law. I was right. I didn't end up really practicing law, but it was a wonderful experience. It changed the way that I thought in a lot of ways. Made me more rigorous in my logic. It was a broadening experience. I really enjoyed it, and it's something that I'm certainly glad that I did.
Victor in Manhattan Beach, California. Good afternoon or good morning to you.
Yes, good morning. On major holidays, Google changes their homepage logo to commemorate historical figures or holidays. And this past Easter, Ben, you made a post criticizing Google for changing their logo, commemorating Cesar Chavez rather than something with Jesus Christ, and how offensive that was and was a slap in the face to Christians. And my question is, and I see your yarmulke, what is a nice Jewish boy like you writing these articles like this? And also, do you think something like this demonstrates how kind of polarizing, because I've heard a lot of people on the right now use Bing exclusively, and just kind of how that whole thing came about.
Well, I mean, as far as me being a nice Jewish boy who defends Christianity, I would say that Jesus was also a nice Jewish boy. But as far as my beliefs about Christianity, I've always felt Judeo-Christian religion is the wellspring of morality in this country. And if, as the society becomes more secular, freedom for Jews will go away alongside freedom for Christians. We're seeing this in California, where there's already a bill moving through the California Assembly that would strip nonprofit status from any religious youth group that discriminates on the basis of religion, sexual orientation, or gender. So I believe that when we discard religion and religious values, including Christian values, because this is largely a Christian country, then we are shooting ourselves in the foot. As far as what was the second half of his question?
Google, Easter, and people are now
Bing.
Right
People using Bing. Okay, correct. Right. Yeah. Look, I appreciate when folks use market power to make their point, as opposed to calling for government censorship. Google's a private company; it can do whatever it wants. But making folks aware of Google's kind of political stance is something that I think is well worthwhile. It allows us to make informed decisions, the same way that if there's a website that the left doesn't like, they make informed decisions about to use it or not.
Do large corporations like Google, et cetera, benefit from government regulation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason that Google has tons of lobbyists on the Hill. I said earlier, I don't think we live in a capitalist system. I think we live in a corporatist system. I think that the government picks winners and losers in large part based on whether those folks are friendly to them. When the President of the United States goes to certain companies and makes promises to them based on how many people they hire, and this was his new business plan. His new business plan is, I'll give you a tax cut if you hire X, Y, and Z. That is the government running business, right? The government saying, we're going to let you keep more of your own money. That's the government staying out. The government putting strings on that, why doesn't the government want to run the Human Resources Department? If you hire, my good friend Joe over here, then I will help you by giving you a tax cut. This is why you've seen the Obama administration embroiled in corruption scandals like Solyndra. It's why you see a continued growth in the amount of correspondence between major corporations, whether it's Facebook and Google, or whether it's General Electric, and the Obama administration. Again, this is not new. It's just grown tremendously. I mean, Thomas Edison, way back when he was during the Roosevelt administration, Thomas Edison actually suggested that he be granted, that he basically made economic czar and structured the entire U.S. economy. So this is one of the great misconceptions about American business, actually, is the idea that American business is inherently capitalistic and free market oriented. They're not. They're money oriented. So if the government is a big grab bag of cash, business will go in and they will go after that grab bag of cash because their motive is profit margin for their stockholders. So businesses can be on the wrong side of this too. And this is, I think, one of the points at which the Tea Party and Occupy were supposed to meet. Right? I mean, Occupy was supposed to point out that crony capitalism was bad. Instead, they marched on Wall Street, which makes no sense. If you're going to be against crony capitalism, go march on the folks who are elected.
From Ben Shapiro's first book, Brainwashed, most Christians and Jews feel that there is no implicit conflict between science and religion. Science and religion bolster one another. The more we learn about the world in which we live, the clearer it becomes that there must be a divine planner. Professors don't think so. Science and religion are completely at odds with one another. God is not a master designer. Everything is an accident.
I mean, that is the essential point of a lot of folks on the secular left, and that's a devastating idea for basic running and functioning of Western civilization. I truly believe that science and religion are not in conflict. There are parts of the Bible that are metaphorical, but if God created both, as I believe that He did, then they should not be in conflict. As far as the impact of the belief that in biological determinism and the lack of free will, the best proof of religion to me is the idea that I get to make a decision about how I'm going to lead my life. And that is proof that I exist on a plane beyond just my simple biology. There are folks on the left, not all people on the left, there's people on the militant secular left who believe that if you had a giant computer somewhere and you input all information about the universe and all information about environment and biology and physics, that you would end up with, you could tell when I'm going to scratch my nose, right? Because everything is biologically determined. The problem with that is that there's then no more, morality goes out the window. Every action is predetermined. There should be no culpability for action because you're not responsible for your own action. In fact, the concept of responsibility is entirely foreign to the idea of biological determinism. You can't run a society that way. So even if you think that free will is a legal fiction, most people, the vast majority of people who think free will is a legal fiction and it's just a creation of your unconscious brain or whatever it is, the firing of neurons creates your consciousness, even those folks will at a certain point start speaking in the language of responsibility because it's built in. We understand that inherently human beings are responsible for their own actions. They may not get what they deserve. You can ask the questions about whether God is just or whether there is a just God or whether everything that happens in life is done for a reason. And those are legit questions, and in my own religious belief, I believe God wants us to ask those questions. It's proof that you believe in Him, that you can ask Him those questions. Judaism is a questioning religion, but what I think is tremendously damaging for both individuals, the society at large, and frankly I think it's not true, is the idea that in a universe without a God exists in the same way as a universe with a God, both morally and physically.
Bill Beatty tweets in, please ask Ben what his hunch or thoughts about the IRS coming to harass the Tea Party. Is it political or routine regulatory issue?
It's clearly political. I mean, it's clearly political. And that's nothing new. FDR had a program to target his enemies politically. JFK actually had a special division of the IRS that was designated to target people politically. And don't be fooled by when folks say that there are a few liberal groups that were also targeted. JFK did the same thing. In fact, under his group, 75% of the groups to be targeted were his political enemies, and then he threw in another 25% so it didn't look like he was targeting his political enemies. This has been true, for a very long time, that the IRS has been used. Bill Clinton routinely used the IRS as a proxy for him politically. This is the danger of an overbearing government. I mean, the income tax is a ridiculous thing. Why is it the government knows more about me than I do? Why, if we had a national sales tax, there are many other types of tax that could be implemented that would not involve the government having to force me to voluntarily proclaim everything that I spent this year. That's nuttiness. And having and assuming good intentions on the part of the bureaucrats in the IRS, They're bureaucrats just like everybody else. I mean, there is no great, wise, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-moral being called the government. It's a bunch of people who could be working at the DMV or they could be working at the IRS, but they're normal people just like you are. They make the same mistakes you are. They're politically motivated just like you are, and they're taking your money. That's the only difference between them and you. You're not taking their money. They're taking yours.
If people were to buy one of your books, which one would you recommend to them?
Well, it depends on the mood you're in. I would recommend if you want to know, kind of my full breakdown on how the left thinks and how to deal with it, I would recommend Bullies. In terms of which book is probably the best researched, I would say Primetime Propaganda. And I really believe it's one of the best books ever written on television because it's really in depth. And if you just want a beach book, I would recommend Project President. But they're all written for different purposes. So it's like asking me to choose, which one of my not yet born children I like the most. I love all the books that I've written, and they all have different experiences. Some of them were more difficult to write than others, for sure.
Why?
Porn Generation was particularly difficult to write because I'm not a fan of schmutz. Is the Yiddish word? It means kind of smut. Okay. It was spiritually dirtying to have to wade through that material to write it. But I felt like it was a mission that was important enough that I needed to write the book. But that was definitely the most difficult of the books to write on kind of a spiritual, moral level.
Bill King tweets in, conservatism leaves you alone, but that does not apply to women, gays, and non-Christians, does it?
Well, let's go through these one at a time. As far as women, I assume he's talking about abortion. In every other area of American life, conservatives don't care what women do. Conservatives are not interested in having their hands on a woman's body, meaning in terms of abortion. That's why we don't care about a woman's stomach. We also don't care about her leg. There are many parts of the woman's anatomy that we don't care about government regulating. What we care about is actually what's inside your uterus. We care about the child that's growing there. The abortion debate is very simple. Either you believe that it's a life or you believe it's not. If you don't believe that it's a life, then you can do whatever you want with it. It's the same as a kidney. If you believe it's a life, then it is fundamentally immoral and evil to allow somebody to kill it, in the same way that it was fundamentally immoral and evil for you to live next door to a slave owner in 1847 and not try to do anything about it. So that's what the abortion debate is. That has nothing to do with a woman's right to choose. The woman has many rights to choose. Rights to choose is far too vague. It's about a woman's right to kill something that is growing inside her. And as soon as we get specific, that's when the polls shift. It's easy to say right to choose, but there are many choices that came before the point where you're now killing what's inside of you. As far as gays, I've said earlier on the program, I'm an advocate of the government getting completely out of the business of marriage entirely. So, and I think that's a direction that the Republican Party should move. I've never been an advocate for regulation of what gays do in their own personal life. The most nonsensical position on the right that I've found is gays should be allowed to adopt, but they shouldn't be allowed to get married. It's an idiotic position. It makes no sense. If anything, it should be the reverse. If you're concerned about gays raising children, then that's a legit concern. If you're concerned about two dudes living together, then you're an idiot. And as far as his third one, non-Christians being regulated, precisely the opposite. Precisely the opposite. It is secularists who are seeking to regulate Christians. It is not Christians who are going to secularists and insisting that they serve their Christian weddings. It is a judge and it is a Supreme Court in New Mexico that is ordering that a Christian photographer be forced to photograph a same-sex marriage in New Mexico, where gay marriage isn't legal. That is where the left is tyrannical when it comes to religion. We are watching in real time the death of freedom of religion in this country. That's coming from the left. That's not coming from the right. So the idea that non-Christians are persecuted in the country is precisely the reverse. It is Christians who are under assault.
Next call for Ben Shapiro. Kurt, Indianapolis. Hi.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. I'd like to thank C-SPAN for allowing Mr. Shapiro to be so uninterrupted, and how exciting it is. As a father of people his age and the same age as his sisters, it's exciting to hear his viewpoint and his opinions. My question, how does he, with me and his parents being a TV generation, how does he see his generation and how he has come to voice his opinion over the internet getting across to his generation, and then how does my generation learn to use that new medium to become aware of what his generation's thinking?
Well, it's tremendously exciting. What we're watching is the fragmentation of the old media, and it's incredible. I mean, there's so many more options now for information. There's more information being created every day than were for centuries in human history. It's truly amazing to watch. What that does mean is that when you're bringing up children, you have to pretty carefully monitor what it is exactly that they're looking at. In my home, when I was growing up, my parents used to show us old movies. We were big fans of old movies. I've seen every Oscar-nominated film between 1933 and now. But I grew up on black and white movies. And I grew up on Dick Van Dyke's Show, and they used to rent the Waltons, and they're very clear about that. They reach a certain age, and then they'll go see what they want to see at their friend's house. But it is imperative that parents teach values, and it's a challenging time. I mean, as information becomes more plentiful and more available and more at fingertips, it's a challenging time to raise kids. I'm looking forward to it with our kid, but it means that you have to be, number one, more careful in the sources of information. Number two, it means that you have to really inculcate values. When I say inculcate, I don't mean, back-of-the-hand values. I mean, you have to teach your kids why. I would say my parents were wonderful about this. My parents never said that it was wrong for me to ask a question. They always tried to get me the answer, and if they didn't have the answer, they tried to find somebody who did have the answer. They treated me as a serious human being from the time that I was a kid and all the way through my teenage years, and treated me as a rational, functioning human being. And when I proved that I could earn, when I proved that I deserved responsibility, then they handed me the responsibility. That had to be earned. That's what I would recommend in terms of that. In terms of older people getting involved in technology, get on the internet. It's a wonderful place. Learn about it. It's an incredible place for exchange of ideas and transfers of information. And there could not be a more exciting time in human history to be part of a political movement than now, when you're able to pick up a camera and make news, when you're able to go to the local Best Buy, pick up everything you need to make a full-length movie, and you can do it for less than $100,000. It's an amazing thing. All of the gatekeepers are going away, and this tremendous free flow of information that's occurring, I could not be more excited about it, and that's what makes me excited about the future of the country, even as government grows. I think that eventually the American people will recognize what we're in, the difficulties that we face, but they'll only do it when they begin to access the information that they need to see.
Brad is in Clarkston, Washington. Our guest is Ben Shapiro. We have about 40 minutes left in this month's program. Please go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, Ben, I like listening to you. I agree with about everything you're saying, but you really lose me when you talk about Iran is going to be a nuclear terror threat when Israel has 300 nukes, and they've been doing nothing but terrorizing the Palestinians, driving these people off their lands. They've lived there for hundreds of years, stealing their homes, killing their people, raping their people. How do you defend that? That's all I have to say.
Well, I mean, as far as the Israel-Palestinian conflict, that's a different conflict than the Israel-Iran conflict. At root, they have the same basic premise, which is a religious conflict, which nobody wants to acknowledge, but is absolutely the truth. Israel is historically based. The Jews were there far longer than the Palestinians. The Palestinians are largely an agglomeration of folks from other countries. From Egypt, Yasser Arafat was an Egyptian. From Jordan, Jordan is 70% Palestinian, because Palestine used to encompass all of Jordan. So there's a lot of history here. As far as why Iran would be a good source of. I'm not encouraging, by the way, that the United States take unilateral military action against Iran right now. I'm encouraging that the United States give Israel the green light to do so covertly. But Israel is threatened by an Iranian nuke for a very simple reason, and that is that the Iranian regime does not behave in rational fashion. As much as the USSR was a nasty, evil, disgusting, horrible, brutal, genocidal regime, they actually behaved in relatively rational fashion. There could be mutually assured destruction. There is none with a bunch of folks who say that if Israel blows up Tehran, they don't care. There's also another factor, which is that Israel's only ability to exist is based on Israel's nuclear superiority in that region. They have other military superiority, but there are 6 million Jews in that region, and there are 300 million Arabs, 400 million Arabs, all of whom would seek to destroy, not all of whom, a vast majority of whom would seek to destroy the state of Israel. The moment that Iran threatens that it will either hand over a nuke to a terrorist group like Hezbollah, which can shoot rockets into northern Israel, or to the Muslim Brotherhood in the south, which can shoot rockets into Eilat or Ashdod. The moment that actually happens, then Israel is forced into a conventional proxy war. And a conventional proxy war, a war of attrition for a long period of time, is of tremendous disadvantage to the state of Israel. So number of nukes actually doesn't matter. Israel's one strategic advantage is in their increasing capacity with regard to missile defense, which is going to eventually be their best option. It's not a particularly good option. You don't want the Iranian regime with nukes, not only because of Israel, but because the Iranian regime has a history of attacking folks abroad, including every place from Buenos Aires to Europe.
Laura tweets into you, Mr. Shapiro, conservatives need to learn that arguing for smaller government doesn't have to be an ugly, racist exercise that targets the poor.
Well, I agree. I think that the only people who are arguing that it's an ugly racist exercise targeting the poor are the bullies that I talk about in my book. I'm still at a loss to explain how lower taxes is a racist, bullying, horrible, evil thing that targets the poor. I promise you, nobody on the right side of the aisle hates the poor. The only people who apparently hate the poor are the people who want to keep them in permanent misery by suggesting that food stamps are the solution to poverty. Food stamps are not the solution to poverty. Economic growth is the solution to poverty. Economic growth is the solution to deficits. Better things are the solution to poverty. There's a reason that the poor now, right, live better than they did at the beginning of the 20th century, and it ain't close. They live better than middle-class people did at the beginning of the 20th century. They live better than many rich people lived at the beginning of the 20th century. Not because they're rich, but because all of the products that they can buy for that money are so much better. What makes your life better? Well, what makes your life better isn't just somebody dropping off a check in your mailbox. It's the ability to go down to the mall and pick up all the things that you need. All of the things that used to cost a fortune now cost pennies. That's an effect of capitalism. That's where the future is going. The future is better stuff for less money. That's the future. The future is not taking money from some people and giving it to others.
Are you interested in political office?
Maybe at some point. I mean, I live in California, so that's tough. Yeah, I wouldn't be uninterested in political office, but I really feel that the culture has to be shifted on a pretty root level before I'd want to run for office. I want to see the right begin to make inroads, not only with regard to Hollywood, but with regard to the media and with regard to other institutions of the left that have been predominantly run by folks adverse to conservative interests for a very long time. Because running for office isn't going to be enough. This is one of the things conservatives need to recognize. There is no white knight on a shining knight on a white horse. There is no guy there is no Reagan who's going to come in and fix everything. You know why? Because Reagan didn't come in and fix everything. Reagan came in and he fixed some things. But right now, the country is headed in such a direction that even if a temporary reverse is not going to be enough, there needs to be a ground shift where the country decides what it wants to be. Right now, the country has decided what it wants to be. The country apparently wants to be a semi-failing European state. That's where we're moving. Unless the country decides that it wants to really live the life of entrepreneurship and freedom and liberty and the excitement of creativity, until we get back to the excitement of creativity as opposed to the unearned moral superiority of grabbing somebody else's wallet, then we are going to be in a heck of a lot of trouble. And I'm not talking in terms of some phantom 47% who are takers instead of make. I don't believe that. I think that a lot of Americans, a huge number of Americans, get something from the government. Listen, I have my federally subsidized student loans, right? I mean, everybody's got something that they get from the government. What I'm saying is that we have to fundamentally shift how we think of American life in this country. And there are trade-offs. Maybe that federally subsidized student loan goes away. But if in return what I get is a better education, if in return what I get is cheaper products, if in return what I get is a better standard of living, and a more exciting world where I get to make my own opportunities and I'm not constrained by what the government says I can and cannot do, that's the kind of world I want to live in. Do people have enough faith in themselves to go out and succeed and make an exciting and beautiful and really, do they have the passion to create a new world for themselves, or do they want a world that is bounded on all sides by a government that's supposed to ensure equal outcomes?
Ed, Fort Myers, Florida, please go ahead with your question or comment for author Ben Shapiro.
Greetings, Mr. Shapiro. Do you believe that the best weapon against an enemy is another enemy? In essence, what we see in Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, is our government inadvertently creating chaos whereby our enemies are fighting other enemies in lieu of fighting Christians and Jews. Once again, do you believe the best weapon against an enemy is another enemy?
I hear the argument. I don't think that it's a good description of what's happening on the ground. Christians are being murdered in Egypt by members of the Muslim Brotherhood. Christians are being targeted by al-Qaeda forces in Syria. And as far as what U.S. foreign policy should look like in the Middle East, I've come to what may be considered a cynical conclusion, which is that there is no utopia in the Middle East. There is no point at which right now, we impose a solution, democracy flourishes, republics build themselves up, everybody learns to live together in peace and harmony, and we all go out and have a froyo. I don't think that that's what's going to happen here. I think that what's going to happen in the Middle East is a continuing set of day-to-day operations that either enhance stability in American interests or don't enhance stability in American interests. Eventually, hopefully, some of these regions will develop their own form of democracy and recognize that liberalism and democracy are something that are worth having. But until then, I don't think it's something that can be forced. I don't think that, I don't think it's hypocritical for us to support people who we don't think are who agree with all the values of America if it's in American interest. The best hope for humanity is the continued thriving of the United States. In order for the United States to continue to thrive, our interests have to be served, and sometimes our interests that are being served are not great for some people. And that's an unfortunate reality on the ground. It's an unfortunate truth. I wish everybody agreed with this. I wish everybody agreed that freedom of speech and liberty actually mattered. Unfortunately, they don't, so American interests have to predominate because that's the only hope for people who wish to be free in those areas of the world.
We've talked about this a little bit, but for those viewers tuning in late, this is an email from Peter. Could you explain more about your use of the term bullies? Your definition of bullies seems to be people who declare their opposition as ones who want to wreck the environment, make cuts to health and services, and are inherently racist. Your callers claim the right is also bullies because they cut off people talking and are harsh in responding to them.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty good distinction, which is being harsh in response is not the same thing as calling someone a nasty human being, based on no evidence. My definition of a political bully is somebody who is fervently opposed to you as a human being because they disagree with what you're saying. And that is the basest form of political bullying. Now, once you do that, once you're a bully, then just like any other bully, the only way to stop a bully is to punch a bully. I mean, the bullies are not going to be stopped by rational conversation. In fact, it is counterproductive to have rational conversation with a bully because the conversation goes something like this. You're the bully, you call me a racist, and I say, well, you know what, it's funny you should say that. I'm really not a racist, but I can see why you would say that. Let's try to have a conversation about voter ID. What I've just done is I've handed you the baton because what I've said is it's actually rational for you to call me a racist. I disagree with you, but it's rational. It's in the spectrum of possibilities. When I say it's rational for you to call me a racist, what I'm really saying is it's possible I'm a racist. Well, it's not possible I'm a racist. I'm not a racist. Show me the evidence. Show me why I'm a racist. Show me what I've said that's racist. And this is when the intimidation tactic that really separates Americans from Americans, destroys the cohesion that America needs. What that tactic is trying to put on people a sense of unearned guilt. The sense that you didn't do anything wrong, but you're still guilty, right? Oprah Winfrey goes on television when she's promoting the Butler. She says, you never have to have said the N-word. You never have to have had ill will toward black folks, but you could still be a racist. How? Isn't that the definition of racism? I don't feel guilty about being a racist because I'm not a racist and I've never done anything racist. You know who should feel guilty about being a racist? An actual racist. So why aren't we all on the same page? Let's find the actual racists and let's go out and let's target them and let's ruin their lives. Right? Why don't we go out and find actual instances of racism and let's go out and let's fix those, as opposed to, well, racism is just in the air, and if you drink the wrong cup of water, then maybe you'll become a... That's not how life works. We're at the point in America, thank God, largely, in fact, due to the left. Largely due to the left. We have reached the point, because of the 1960s, because of the Civil Rights Movement, we've reached a glorious point in American life, which is that the worst thing that you can be called in American life is a racist. If you are a racist, you're excised from rational American society, as you should be and as you always should have been. That's a wonderful thing. Let's recognize the progress that's been made, and then let's focus on rooting out those last vestiges of racism in individuals, find those things, root them out, fix them, and then let's focus on the real problems that plague communities, because I promise you, voter ID is not on the top 10 list of what's plaguing the black community. It's not on the top 100 list of what's plaguing the black community right now.
Ben Shapiro's sixth book comes out in January 2014. The topic?
The topic is going to be about the Obama administration and what I feel is the likening it to a criminal conspiracy. It works very much like a criminal conspiracy in that people don't think the mafia exists or didn't. The head of the mafia doesn't have to give every direct order. All that has to happen is you have to put your people in place. You have to put the message down to the lower level bureaucrats that if you want to rise in the system, if you want to be a made man, all you have to do is something that I imply, and eventually the crime gets committed, and look at that, it just happens to benefit our organization. We've seen it on everything from the IRS to the NSA. We've seen it on everything from Benghazi to the Fast and Furious scandal. Something that seems to benefit the Obama administration, benefits the higher-ups, but when it gets found out, oh, it's just low-level guys. It's always just low-level guys. There are always a couple low-level guys. They go and they do their time, and they come out, and by the way, in all of these scandals, every single one of them, nobody has lost their job. And when I say lost their job, I mean lost their pay and benefits. Even the people who have lost, resigned, all of them are still receiving their full pension that they were due when they decided to resign. No one has gone to jail over Fast and Furious. No one has gone to jail over Benghazi. The State Department employees who are supposed to be under investigation by the ARB, they were reinstated by John Kerry just this month. So there's something very funny going on, and it's about time that people recognized it because it's important. Part of it is the Obama administration and how President Obama runs his shop. Part of it is that when you have a government this big and this powerful, there's always the danger that the person who takes control of those levers, those machineries of power, can use it to their advantage. And the left felt this way about President Bush with a lot less justification than the right feels this way about Barack Obama. If you don't like how Bush ran the government, if you don't like how Obama ran the government, the solution is don't make the government quite so big.
Ben Shapiro, if people want to get a hold of you, do you have a website, Twitter?
My Twitter is @BenShapiro. I tweet a lot, and it's fun. I like to go back and forth with folks. If you want to email me, the best way to email me is through my website, benjaminshapiro.com. I'm also available through Breitbart.com. And then, as I mentioned before, there's a new website that I'll be leading, a new effort I'll be leading called TruthRevolt.com. It'll be a pretty hard-nosed, battling attempt to create consequences, especially for folks in the media who lie about their objectivity or who participate in activities that the market should know about. And advertisers on these programs should understand that hopefully from now on there will be ramifications to spending your ad dollars where the American people don't like it.
Maurice emails in, I would like to hear Ben's position on Mark Levin and Citizens for Self-Governance, their call for a convention of the states.
Well, Mark's a brilliant guy. I mean, I like Mark a lot. As far as his constitutional amendments, I haven't read his book yet. I'm really looking forward to it. I know about some of them, and I agree wholeheartedly with some of them. As far as a new constitutional convention, it's a great idea. I'd love to see it happen. The chances of it happening in the near future are pretty slim, but hopefully we can build a movement to do that, because the Constitution, thanks to the perversion of it, largely by the Supreme Court, now has structural defects that need correcting. The original Constitution had a significantly lesser structural defect than the current Constitution, but that's because the original Constitution actually meant what it said as opposed to what the Supreme Court says it says.
And you can see that Mark Levin blurbed Ben Shapiro's book, Primetime Propaganda, a must-buy and a must-read. Just to let you know that Mr. Levin will be a guest on this show in January 2014. Therese, Atlantic City, New Jersey. Good afternoon.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking my call. Hello. It's nice to be able to speak to you, Mr. Shapiro. I'll tell you, you are so encouraging, as young as you are. I am a black woman, a Christian conservative. I've been a Republican since I was 18. I'm now 44. And I'm growing very, very discouraged. I think that the only thing that will change what's going on now in this country is education. And there's such a lack of education, you know, with the blacks in this country, as far as them understanding how the Republicans have forged the success of black people in this country. And then you have the liberals who have totally erased the Jim Crow history, the anti-civil rights history, with this Southern strategy propaganda, you know. And basically, I was wondering, what is your... The first thing that communists do is they remove God from society. And then when they do that, society becomes immoral, because there's absolutely no reason to have morals. You can accept everything. It kind of reminds me of something that G.K. Chesterton said. He said, a man whose virtue is tolerance is a man of no convictions. And when we don't have convictions, how can, and people don't want to be educated because they don't want their convictions, I mean, they don't want their beliefs to be saddled in any way or curbed in any way, and they don't want history. You have libertarians saying now that our forefathers were secularists, which we know is revisionist history. So even if you want education, it's very, very difficult to find it anywhere.
All right.
It's very, very difficult, you know.
Therese, we'll allow Mr. Shapiro to respond to you in just a second, but you said you've been a black woman Republican since age 18.
Since I was legally able to vote, yes.
Right. What's that been like to be an African-American Republican for so long?
Well, you know, I also went to art school. I attended the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, and it was very, very difficult. You know, not for me, because I'm a very strong-willed person and I believe in my convictions and I know why I believe what I believe. But you're always coming up against, hey, you're black, you're a woman, you're an artist, you're narrow-minded. But I understand my history. I understand the history of this country. And I learned a long time ago that the liberal agenda was no friend of mine. You know, when liberals tell you, we're your friends, and they Planned Parenthood in our communities, and they run our communities into the ground. I mean, you can't look at this country and see many Republicans running black cities, the inner cities, and the crime gets worse, and the abortion rate is higher, and there's more poverty. You know, when are people going to understand that the liberal agenda isn't working? The liberals aren't their friends.
All right, Therese, thank you for calling in. Here's Mr. Shapiro.
As far as education, I completely agree. I mean, you take a look at the public school system, which is completely dominated by the left, and it is very discouraging. It's why it's so important for parents to really take the education of their own children so seriously. As far as the black community and their feelings about the Republican Party, there are a lot of folks in the black community who just believe by default that Republicans are racist because they've been told that for a very long time. And because there are a lot of Republicans who don't speak well on race issues, and because they've ignored the black community for quite a while. The problem is this: underlying the left's entire momentum shift is as the family dies, everybody needs a friend. So the government becomes your friend. The problem is that the government is the worst friend you ever had. The government's a terrible friend. The government likes to borrow money from you and never repay it. If the government does give you money, it's typically to fund something that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. A normal friend would cut you off until you get help. The government just keeps signing those checks. The government is not your friend. I think as people grow to see that'll help a lot. But the education system remains a huge problem. Look, this is why the left does not like school vouchers, because the minute that black folks have the ability, especially black folks, because when we're talking about impoverished inner city areas like South Los Angeles or New Orleans or Chicago, when black folks have the ability to take their kids and put them in a school that is succeeding, and the dollars follow the kid rather than the school, then we are going to start seeing a tremendous shift in kind of the mindset of a lot of the kids who are now experiencing the freedom from poverty for the first time. And I don't mean just poverty in terms of economics, but poverty that is provided by the public school system, which is in many ways discriminatory. I mean, there's a big difference between South Los Angeles and Beverly Hills High School.
Dan in Toledo, Ohio, please go ahead with your question or comment for Ben Shapiro.
Yes, thank you. I have one quick question. I'd like to have his definition of a Federalist. I seen you was reading the Federalist Papers. And that's it. Thank you.
Dan, why do you ask that question? Why is that important to you?
Well, I do a crossword puzzle, and I have an old pocket dictionary, and I noticed that George Washington had an F next to his name, Federalist. And I tried looking it up, and what the definition it is, it seems like I need another dictionary to figure it out. I'm not really, I've never heard about it before.
Yeah, going back to the Federalist Papers, I mean, the basic definition of federalism is that all rights that are not given to the federal government under the Constitution are reserved by the states, and those rights are extraordinarily limited. The right to make war, the right to create tariffs, interstate commerce. These were all very, very limited powers because the Constitution, this is a great argument in constitutional theory and constitutional law, is whether the Constitution was a compact of the people or whether it was a compact of the states. That was actually a conflict that broke out during the Civil War because the Confederacy said that the North had been breaking the Constitution by not returning freed slaves to the South. And so this was a compact of the states, and the states were going to withdraw. That was their legal case for withdrawing from the Constitution. That was John Calhoun's case for secession back in the 1830s. What we've seen now is that the federal government has completely overshot all of its boundaries. There are no boundaries to federal power anymore. The federal government can regulate how much toilet water you use. The federal government can regulate you growing pot in your backyard. The federal government can regulate literally anything and everything in your life. which of course makes the states adjunct. It makes the states not as important as they once were. It means that the laboratories of democracy, which were supposed to predominate, have largely been pushed to the side. Now, thank God that there are still state differentiations, because if we were all like California, instead of some of us being like Texas, no jobs would get created in this country at all. But the power of federalism, the power of local government, is a power that remains necessary, and more necessary than ever, because with the federal government this large, and this faceless, and this bureaucratic, there can be no way that the federal government can decide what's best for your kid. At root, federalism is premised on the idea that your local community, those are the people who are best at deciding what's good for you and your life, and only the very big issues should be decided by not only your neighbors, but people who live 3,000 miles away that you've never heard of, people who you've never dealt with, and people who you don't know anything about. We need to restore that basic idea of autonomy to the states. The counter-argument is always, well, you know, when you did that last time, there was slavery. Understood, and that was a tremendous evil that was abolished by the Civil War, but it doesn't undercut the basic rationale for states' rights. All it does is say that slavery was a deeply immoral and evil thing that had to be abolished, and it took hundreds of thousands of lives to do it.
15 minutes left in this month's in-depth program. Ben Shapiro, the author of 5 nonfiction books, the 6th coming out in January. Joe, Ferndale, Michigan. Hi.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. Just a quick question for Mr. Shapiro. What is your opinion of how Eric Snowden's revelations have impacted the Obama foreign policy?
Well, I mean, Edward Snowden's revelations, it's very interesting, because Edward Snowden, the NSA leaker, Edward Snowden was, I'm not clear on whether he's a traitor. I'm not clear on whether he's a hero. I don't think it matters. This is one of the things I think we have to get away from as a society. Is you're a hero, you're a traitor. Who cares? What was the information that he revealed good for the American public to know? I think it was very good for the American public to know, especially given the fact that a couple of months ago, President Obama basically declared the war on terror over. Well, if the war on terror is over, then you don't need to be looking at my G-chats with my wife. So the rationale for what President Obama has been doing on the NSA level has basically been undermined by President Obama's own rhetoric. I'm very happy that Snowden brought these revelations to light. I think the level of scrutiny is significantly higher than was even contemplated by folks who backed the Patriot Act. I was a backer of the Patriot Act. Certainly, if I had known that it was going to go this far, I probably wouldn't have backed the Patriot Act. This is too much. It's too intrusive. And I do feel that it is violative of basic American liberties. Now, again, that doesn't speak to whether Edward Snowden should be prosecuted. You can get a good result by doing a bad thing. But it does speak to the fact that, again, government is now so large that it knows everything about you, from what you purchased on Amazon to how much money you earn. There is not one area of American life, except perhaps the bedroom, and even there, not really, where the government knows nothing about you. Now the government knows everything. I mean, if that doesn't frighten people into recognizing that our government's just too big, I'm not sure exactly what will.
Eric Eichinger tweets in, there are a lot of Christian/conservative writers I know. What is your best recommendation of how to break into Hollywood? And by the way, he tweets it at Pastor Ike. So.
Well, Pastor Ike, I mean, the best way to break into Hollywood, if you're a conservative, is to keep it on the down low. I've recommended this to folks in Hollywood who are trying to break in, which is never say that you've met me. Instead, just go to Hollywood and break in as a young writer. And then once you have power, use it to your advantage. This is something I recommend to college students as well. Go to a liberal university. Use it as an opportunity to educate yourself. Instead of when they assign John Maynard Keynes, go out and read some Milton Friedman on the other side, and then write exactly what the teacher wants, get the credential, and use it to your advantage. The Harvard Law stamp of approval on my resume is definitely a wonderful thing to have, even though I disagree with everything that pretty much all of my professors ever said at Harvard Law School. So same thing holds true in Hollywood. Understand reality. Conservatives, I said earlier, I don't like it when people war with reality. The reality is Hollywood's a liberal place. Don't war with the reality. Don't expect that those folks are going to change just because they want you to change. Instead, either operate within the system or go out and find funding outside the Hollywood system and build your own Hollywood system, or help use your market power to take down the current Hollywood system. All of these are possible options. What is not an option is to walk into a production office in Hollywood, take out your Republican Party local card, slap it on the desk, and say, I'm a Republican and I'm here to write for your show, because that ain't going to work well.
Ben Shapiro, is there a dishonesty in misrepresenting yourself? Are you misrepresenting yourself by not explaining who you are or not?
Well, I mean, I'm with Machiavelli on this one, which is that when it comes to getting into an industry that has been dominated for a long time by certain folks, sometimes you need to omit certain details from your resume. By the way, this is an experience that I had even in the law firm world. When I was at Harvard Law School, I graduated cum laude, right? That means I was the top 30% of my class. 40%, something like that. When I graduated, I had the worst interview record of anybody in my class. I went on 32 separate law school interviews, and I went 1 for 32 on those law school interviews. And the reason for that was not because my resume wasn't good. I had 3 published books. I had a national bestseller in Brainwash. I had a syndicated column, and I'd been on TV all the time. But what the problem was, I would walk into the office, and I'd get a liberal partner, and the liberal partner would look. This actually happened during one interview. They saw the title of Porn Generation, and I walk in wearing my yarmulke, and the liberal partner looks at me, and he says, before I can even sit down, he doesn't even say hello. He starts with, you know, I truly believe that religious people, conservative people, have a Freudian fear of sex. Until you opened a law firm interview. And at this point, I know I'm not going to get the job, so I said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. We have more children on average than you. Every poll shows that we're sexually happier than you. So what I ended up doing, I actually went to the Harvard Law School Office of Career, and I said to them, you know, what should I do about this? My record's terrible here. And they said, why don't you just strike your books off your resume? So when you're dealing with discrimination, regardless of what it is, you have 2 choices. One is to take down the system from the outside, and the other is to try and gain power in the system from the inside. You're seeing, you know, Tea Partiers do this inside the Republican Party right now. And whenever you have an infrastructure, those are the only 2 options. So when it comes to established Hollywood, you want to work in Hollywood, you want to make a $30,000 residual check, don't openly say that you're a conservative until you're a showrunner, and at that point you can do whatever you want.
How long did that interview, that law school interview last?
That was about a 15-minute interview, but that was not the only one. I mean, I had situations where I would go to a law firm interview, and somebody would pull an old column that I'd written out of their pocket and start reading me back things that I'd written. What that had to do with my ability to read a transactional real estate contract is completely beyond me, but apparently it made a huge difference to them.
Randy, Minneapolis, good afternoon.
Thanks for taking my call. In other words, Mr. Shapiro is saying that it's okay to just leave out information and not tell the truth to people. I find that kind of problematic. I'm an atheist, and I find that the Christian belief, that's fine that people believe in their Christian values, but not to impose it on us that don't. And so you're saying that it's okay to sneak in and get a job and lie on your resume? That's like, is that part of your Christian beliefs? But thank you very much.
Well, number 1, I'm not Christian. Number 2, as far as sneaking in and imposing beliefs, the left imposes its beliefs on a regular basis through Hollywood. If you can't do the job, you'll get fired regardless of whether you are liberal or whether you're conservative. Getting your foot in the door may require you to omit your activism for the pro-life movement. And when it comes to folks imposing their beliefs, right now in America, what I'm watching is as the militant secular atheist movement imposes its set of beliefs on Christians all over the country. And where we are going next is a full-out assault on the church system, with states attempting to withdraw nonprofit status from churches based on liberals not agreeing with what churches do. And that, to me, is a fundamental violation of what it means not only to be an American, but of the First Amendment itself.
Naren, Stanford, Kentucky. Email. What's your position on immigration reform, and do you believe, like some conservatives, that we need to slow the growth of total immigration?
I don't believe that we need to slow the growth of total immigration. As you know, somebody who my great-great-grandparents got here in the early 20th century, and then their extended family was all murdered in the Holocaust. But I'm a believer in immigration. What we have right now is, honestly, everybody should agree on immigration. It's the easiest issue in the world. Shut the border, figure out what to do with the people here. The only reason you even have to shut the border is because you have the welfare state. If there were no welfare state, then we could have free flow of people across the border. You could come in, you could work, you could leave, there'd be free commerce. You wouldn't be a net loss in terms of the tax dollar. You wouldn't be not paying taxes and then taking benefits. So you can have one of 2 things. You can either have a welfare state with very restrictive immigration, or you can have a non-welfare state with complete free flow of immigration. If we're going to have the welfare state, which realistically speaking we do, then what we have to do is we have to figure out how to shut the border now so that we're not incentivizing millions of more low education people to cross the low skill people who don't speak English to cross the border. And we actually start enforcing our visas because 40% of the folks who are here illegally have overstayed their visas that we gave them in the first place. And then we figure out what to do with the folks here. And in my view, whether that's a pathway to citizenship or whether that is a pathway to legalization, that doesn't become immediate until after the border is actually secure. Because until the border is secure, it's an open invitation to come in. Because how exactly are we going to tell? Is there a red stamp on your illegal immigration passport? There's no way to tell. If you come over today versus you came over 10 years ago, we can't tell that. There's no way to tell that. So the fact is that everyone sort of agreed on this going in, that it was going to be border security and then immigration reform. And then Barack Obama and Democrats in the Senate said that here's the new deal: border security, immigration reform, and no border security. And then they used that as a weapon to wield against Republicans. And again, this is an example of Republicans not understanding how the left operates. The left never wanted immigration reform. They wanted to run on immigration reform. The left wanted to be able to look in 2014 at all the Latinos and say to them, all the Hispanics, and say to them, look at these evil right-wingers. Look at these evil white-wingers. The reason they stopped immigration reform is because they hate you. Not because they have a rational, but because they hate you. Right? Obama could have done this during his first 2 years. He didn't. The reason he didn't is because he wants that issue as a club to divide people. And so we could come to an agreement on this. Everybody, left, right, center, basically agrees on the basic proposition that I'm stating right now, which is that you can't continue a free flow of immigration into a welfare system. But that's not politically advantageous. So my biggest problem is with both parties. I mean, the Republican Party, on the one hand, says the pro-immigration reform people who want to leave the border open say, on the one hand, we need more free labor for our businesses, which is a really kind of nasty way of churning through people, who don't have high education. It's not about American freedom. It's about we need them to pay our Social Security. I mean, they've actually said this, right? We need young Latino immigrants to pay Social Security for all the old white people. That's nasty. And on the left, you have people who want to leave the border open because those are all potential Democratic voters if you can just get them into the welfare state.
Blake, Washington, D.C., email. And I'm reading this verbatim, so you can take the structure of the sentence and work with that. But why do you think it's necessary to compartmentalize everything as left or right?
I don't think it's necessary to compartmentalize everything as left or right, but everybody knows what I'm saying when I say it, meaning that there is this general objection to folks using the binary terminology of left-right, and that's true in some cases. On NSA, for example, where does the libertarian meet the liberal? Right? I mean, there are issues where there's more complexity and it works in 3 dimensions. When you're talking about certain issues, though, it's much easier, for shorthand's sake, to separate left from right, and we generally know that what I'm talking about is conservatives and the Republican Party versus Democrats and the liberal movement. So it's a useful distinction. It's not an all-encompassing distinction, but I'm never a fan of folks who say that we can't use basic terminology because the reality is too complex. We understand that. Guess what? Words are generally too simplistic for reality in general. So at a certain level, you have to simplify for convenience's sake.
Monique in Bloomington, Indiana, home of Indiana University. Hi, Monique.
Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for doing an in-depth interview talking about issues ranging from immigration to political environment, business, and other issues. My question is, how can a black American woman who is conservative and Christian be able to make a difference impacting both political and business and social life when every time you speak your viewpoints, you get attacked by others who feel that because you are a black woman, you should hold certain views, like you should be a Democrat, or you should be pro-choice, or you should be okay for food stamps or government programs, which I did not choose to be a conservative because of my home upbringing. Is because as time went on and I educate myself and learn and read, those viewpoints became a part of who I am. And it just happens that Republicans share those viewpoints. But I get attacked all the time when I discuss my viewpoints on social issues, government, business, environmental issues, and I feel that I'm not allowed to be who I am. I have to conform to what they feel like I should be, which is a Democrat woman who believes in the viewpoints of the Democrat Party.
Monique, what do you do in Bloomington?
I'm a student.
What year are you?
I'm a senior. I'm about to graduate in the next few months.
Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in New York. I have family heritage from the Caribbean, and I grew up in Florida. But so my viewpoints haven't been shaped by my environment because they're mostly democratic viewpoints. This is just who I am based on my education, my experience in life, and I feel that I get attacked because of these viewpoints I hold.
All right, thank you for that. That's the second self-identified African-American woman conservative we've had.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, congratulations, Monique, on graduation. That's very cool. As far as being attacked, I mean, that's what I talk about in Bullies, but this is the life that we live. There is no way to avoid it. And one of the things that I learned from Andrew Breitbart, he always used to say, you have to walk toward the fire, meaning that being who you are is offensive to some people. And it shouldn't be, but you can't do anything to change that. So you might as well embrace it. You might as well recognize folks aren't going to agree with you. That's okay. Some folks are jerks. And when they attack you for being who you are, it's not out of bounds for you to attack them and say, you know, you're a nasty person for attacking me for my character, as opposed to disagreeing with me on my political opinions. I'm glad that I'm glad you're thinking about those issues, and I would encourage you not to be cowed into silence by folks who think that you ought to think a certain way.
Ben Shapiro lists #1 on his favorite books, The Complete Works of William Shakespeare. Paul emails in, which are your favorite Shakespeare plays and why?
Ooh, Hamlet's my favorite. The tremendous complexity and the brilliant use of language, obviously, but it's the kind of dangling between heaven and hell that's evident throughout the play from Hamlet is wonderful. Also, it's intricately plotted. Everybody always underestimates Shakespeare's plots, and Hamlet is very intricately plotted. It's not just beautifully worded. Lear is an incredible play. Mainly because it struggles with it's a religious play in the sense that it struggles with the great question of all religious believers, which is, how can a universe be so cruel when God is so kind? Right? How can such nasty things happen in such a universe where there's supposed to be godly justice? And that's a question that's well worth asking. It's maybe the only question that's worth asking, it asks it in a beautiful way that feels uplifting at the end, because you get the feeling that while justice is not done, there's a sort of cosmic completeness to the entire play. I'm also I've recently become a fan of Coriolanus. I really like Coriolanus because it's a fascinating take on democracy. It's the only Shakespeare play, as far as I know. There may be others, but it's the only one I know where the public is actually sort of the villain, and that's a fascinating way to structure a play where the public is actually the one going after Coriolanus, and he you know, obviously he betrays Rome, but is he right or is he wrong? Posits such complex moral questions, and he does it in such a with such a view of humanity that all of his tragedies. I'm a big fan of his tragedies more than his comedies. All of his tragedies basically posit that we can reach for the stars even when we are bounded by human constraints, and that's something that I think is at the root of both my politics and my personal life.
Ben Shapiro has been our guest on In Depth. Thank you.
Thanks so much.